And the Oscar goes to Crash.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Picture This, the year of the upset. I'm going to put up the graphic one more time because I'm very proud of my hard work. The year of the upset. If you're listening on podcast, go check out the video, at least the first few minutes. We are here to cover a whole year of Oscar upsets, the awards that left our jaws on the floor, or if you're a 7-year-old Dylan who didn't understand what was going on, would leave your jaw on the floor years later when you rediscovered it. But Chad, welcome to a brand new year of Picture This. I'm very excited.
Yeah, and you playing that like little clip, I feel like for a lot of people that's like some, big like flashbacks that are haunting of, seeing something like, knowing something's going to win and then something else wins. And then, but I think it made a lot of people happy. But what I do know is it's maybe the biggest upset of all time. So that's why I think it's really fun that we're starting with this year in particular.
Yeah, we're kicking it off strong. We're definitely kicking it off with one that I think most people would say is the biggest upset. Not necessarily the worst film to ever win, but more so the most surprising one. Even though if you go back through the odds for certain years, this was the second most likely thing to win that day. But I think just watching other award ceremonies and seeing how the night itself was going, I just think by the end of it, everyone was still, gobsmacked by the outcome. And I think especially in retrospect, especially looking at these films in the history and how it's held up, and how all these films have held up, it definitely is a very interesting discussion that I can't wait to get to with all these movies that we're going to be covering this year, because this is the year of the upset. And again, upset does not mean that we are necessarily upset by the winner winning. In some cases it might, but it's just what was expected to win and what didn't win. We just want to clarify that at the top of every episode before people are, like, oh, how are you upset that Rocky won? Like, it's not the fact that the winner won, it's more so the unexpectedness of it. But speaking of unexpected, we unexpectedly stuck y'all with a third panelist today, and what an unexpected arrival from a first-time guest here on the show. It's not unexpected, we knew she was coming, but I just needed to find a segue for it. It's Stacy. Welcome to Picture This, your first time here on the hot seat. How you feeling?
I am a little bit nervous, as I always am my first time doing a show, but I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about these movies and my feelings at the time and my feelings now, and if they're the same. I'm excited to do this.
And I think what's most fun about this, having you as a guest for this particular episode, is that you kind of lived through it. So you kind of understood what the mentality was at the time versus what it is now. I mean, Chad was, I think, a teenager. I was 7. So like we kind of didn't have the biggest grasp probably of like the actual attitudes at the time for these movies. And as you said, like, you kind of were there when it all started, and you've kind of seen the fallout since. So it'll be really, really fascinating to see, even though, you wanted to be on this panel for a different movie, but I just think knowing what the whole kind of reception around Crash was would lend to a very interesting discussion.
I was very heavily invested at the time. So yeah,
Very
I was definitely aware of what was going on.
I love that. I love that. I love that firsthand experience, because it's always hard when we cover like the 40s or the 50s, and it's like, we don't have any firsthand, witnesses or anything. It's just kind of hindsight. But Chad, we are here another year, 2005. Sorry, I'm just so in the brain of calling things 20 something. But yeah, 2005, 2005. And as always, we do kick things off with history. I should say the slate because I forgot to do so. Listen, it's a little rusty. We're getting back into it. New year, new us. The slate for today is Brokeback Mountain, Capote, Crash, Good Night and Good Luck, and Munich. So those are the 5 titles, very short titles in general, easy on the characters there. But let us get into first the history of 2005. Chad, why don't you set the scene for us in what was going on in 2005? And I can actually ask both of you what your lives were like in 2005. But Chad, why don't you first tell us what the world was up to in 2005?
Oh, here we go. Another year of Picture This. Very excited to get into it. 2005 was designated the International Year of Sport and Physical Education and the International Year of Microcredit. Gianna Geese becomes the first person to survive rabies without a vaccination. The biggest known dwarf planet in the solar system, named Eris, is discovered. North Korea announced that it has nuclear weapons. YouTube was founded. Pretty big deal, right? we're on it now. China ratifies a law to prevent Taiwan from declaring independence. The first YouTube video is uploaded called "Me at the Zoo." I think it was by one of the founders of YouTube. English whiskey is reestablished in England. Dylan, King Dakar opens at Six Flags Great Adventure in Dylan's neck of the woods, the land of New Jersey.
Yeah,
Hurricane
RIP.
Katrina makes landfall along the U.S. Gulf Coast. Pretty big deal there. Tragic. The trial of Saddam Hussein begins. Andrew Stimpson is reported to be the first person proven to be cured of HIV, and Microsoft releases the Xbox 360.
Ooh, wow. A lot of interesting, fresh, new things. Xbox, King Dakar, a lot of sad things, Hurricane Katrina. So, the fallout of 9/11. So, a very interesting point in history. I have to ask both of you, Stacey, you first, since you're our guest. What was Stacey up to in 2005? Do you remember what, like, the social norms and the fashion norms, anything like that at the time that you have to comment on? Like, where were you at in your life at this point?
I
Not
mean,
to date you or age you on this podcast at all, but, what was
I've
2005 like for
revealed
you?
my age a number of
Okay.
times on the channel, I'm pretty sure, or at least
That's okay.
approximate. Um, I had a 6-year-old,
Mhm.
so my life was mostly about paying some bills and making ends meet and taking care of my 6-year-old because I was by that time a single mom. So that was fun, and I had moved back in with my own mom, which
Oh,
thankfully did not last a hell of a long time. But I believe in 2005 I was still back in my mom's house. Yeah, I waitressed. So I actually where I waitressed there was at a mall with also a movie theater that used to play like late showings of stuff. So sometimes I would just go to the movies when I got out of work because, like, at that point, obviously, someone was watching my kid while I
mm,
worked. So I just get out and go to a late show
nice.
at the movies by myself. But I did not see any of these under those circumstances. So
Interesting. Very cool. But
mhm.
you had seen a few of these before, if I recall correctly, right?
Yes, I had seen 2 of them. I don't know. Do you want me to say which ones? Does it matter?
You can say which ones you've seen if you want.
I had seen Brokeback and Crash in the theaters, and then one more than the other multiple times since.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we're very interested to hear that perspective of things. Chad, do you remember what a 15-year-old Chad was up to in 2005?
I don't remember too. I mean, high school. I heard about these movies and stuff. I remember. Because back in the day, and this will go into the conversation about it. I remember a lot of people like to make fun of Brokeback Mountain because it was a very anti you know, gay kind of population a lot of the time, especially around like high school and
Mm,
stuff. So I remember it being like the gay cowboy movie. So that's like all I knew about it back then, is that I just had that like kind of drilled into my head. Um, and then it became something that actually I'll spoil it now, that I actually have loved in the past. Will I love it today? We'll talk about it. But yeah, and then I never got around to Crash until like much later, and then the other ones, not until like very recently and stuff. So I wasn't really in the vein of watching a lot of the best picture type movies around then. And then, but now, when Stacy's like, I tried my hardest to see some of these movies, but I had a kid. I'm living that right now. So
yeah.
that's kind of
Yeah.
my life as it is.
You're
Yeah. It's
gonna
a
have
Um,
full
the
circle
black
moment.
spots. You're just gonna have spots where all you saw was kids' movies, except
Yeah.
for
Right.
stuff you watch for it to be on YouTube, and then they'll
Yeah.
come up later, and you have to like go back and just fill them all in.
Yeah, and that's a good segue to where I was in 2005 because I was 7 years old. So I was
Mhm,
watching probably alongside, I'm around the same age as your daughter, Stacey. Like, watching, the movies I went to see in the theaters. It was like Madagascar, it was Wallace and
mhm,
Gromit, it was King Kong, which was a little bit more adult, but like that was like the big like family blockbuster. Star Wars. I saw my first Star Wars movie in 2005 on the big screen. The first Star Wars movie I ever saw was Episode 3 on the big screen.
mhm.
So it was a very cool kind of era to live in as a kid. Also, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, loved that movie when it came out. So it's very interesting to like kind of see how things change over the years, or not, or how nostalgia informs how things change. Like I still love Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and I know everyone else like says it's like Satan's spawn. But you know, I really do love it. But I think that's what's so cool about like this year, because we're all coming at it from different perspectives. Stacy as a parent, me as a child, and then Chad as like a teenager, and like just seeing what the different attitudes were. Because the only reason I watched the Oscars in 2005 was to see what awards King Kong and Wallace and Gromit would win. Like I didn't know what Crash or Brokeback or Munich were. So I think it's going to be really cool to talk about. But why don't we get to Chad, some births, some deaths, some albums that also came out in 2005 before we proceed to the movies themselves.
There's only one birth of like a notable person that I could find that's like prevalent to like movies or like, you know, fame. So I Noah Jupe, that actor, Noah Jupe. So for the deaths, I don't have many, but I have a few. The great Rosa Parks, Luther Vandross, Pat Morita, Pope John Paul II, Johnny Carson, Richard Pryor, Anne Bancroft. I think we had her on something. Probably giving her an award, right?
Yeah, she won for The Graduate. Yep.
I was gonna say probably for The Graduate.
Yep. Sandra Dee, Hunter S. Thompson, Charles Rocket, Johnny Cochran, and Frank Gorshin.
There you go. Yeah, very, very sad. I want to throw in two more births just because Daphne Keene from Logan, and then little Mike Flanagan star Lulu Wilson, also 2005.
How did I not see them? Oh my God.
That's all right, man. That's why I come up to alley oop. You know, we're like a team. It's fine. All right, what albums do you have, Chad?
All right, I have a few physically, and then one I think I own, but I couldn't find. We have Alligator by The National. We also have, this one's backwards. One of my favorite albums, maybe my favorite album of all time, Illinois by Sufjan Stevens. There you go. Yep. And then you have I'm Wide Awake, It's Morning by Bright Eyes, another one of my favorite albums. And then you have Demon Days by Gorillaz.
Nice.
Fantastic album. Yep. And then you have Tack by Sigur Rós. Late Registration by Kanye West, Silent Alarm by Block Party, X and Y by Coldplay, Feels by Animal Collective, and Dead Wing by Porcupine Tree.
Now we can transition into the ceremony itself, but first, on Oscar nomination morning, we have to say farewell to a bunch of other films' Best Picture chances. So it's time to kind of give our due to the films of 2005 that didn't make the cut for Oscars. I knew I kind of threw this at you really quickly, Stacy, before we recorded, but do you have any other movies from 2005 that aren't the five that we're going to be talking about today that you wanted to give a little tip of the cap to?
Well, looking at what came out in 2005, there's one movie in particular that anyone that knows me knows I'm going to shout out. And that movie is Constantine.
Nice.
Which I'm glad to see people are coming around on. When it came out in 2005, it did not get the love from most people. It did from me, and it has ever since. But now it seems like, obviously, they're talking sequels, so like people are coming around on it. Also, Batman Begins, of course. And there were two other Heath Ledger movies that came out in 2005.
Okay. One
of which you've probably heard of and don't like. The other of which is Casanova, which most people have not ever seen. But it's a fun little rom-com-y, watch Heath Ledger be super charming kind of movie. The other one I also saw I saw all of them in theaters because Heath Ledger was in them. But the other one had another favorite actor of mine. They're actually my 1 and 2 favorite actors.
Was it Matt Damon?
That would be Matt Damon in The Brothers Grimm.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Another movie that I think is kind of fun. It's pretty dark, really. It's, I think it's PG-13, but I think I might have brought my daughter. I don't know. But it is a pretty kind of dark movie for its topic. I like it. Nobody else does. I'm sure it's rotten on like very, very rotten on Rotten Tomatoes, but it entertains me. And a movie that I've always really liked that I'll admit is not good, The Island.
All right.
I don't know. I really like The Island, even though it's not a great movie. I'm sure there's lots of prestigious movies you guys will mention. There's a lot of good horror that year too, actually, but I'm not going to say them all.
I love the personal connections. I love that. As I said, this was a big year for me. Star Wars, my first ever Star Wars movie I saw was Revenge of the Sith in the theater, so that was for me very fundamental for me. And a lot of my list of like movies I remember loving at the time were movies that like probably Chad won't bring up because they were like very like kid centric or young. But like movies like Robots because of Winn-Dixie, The Pacifier, Pooh's Heffalump movie, Are We There Yet? Racing Stripes, Herbie Fully Loaded. I said Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Sky High. Oh my gosh, modern masterpiece. Wallace and Gromit. I know Chad will bring that one up. Chicken Little, a nostalgic pick that has not aged well. Chronicles of Narnia, a nostalgic pick that I think has aged very well. Cheaper by the Dozen too. Rent, which I didn't watch when I was a kid, but I very much liked in my teenage years. So a lot of them were like kid movies that I loved. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, another one. It wouldn't be till later that I would kind of come around to some of the more like prestige, as you said, Stacy, Oscar-y movies. But I'll let Chad probably take care of that end of things. Chad, yeah, Stacy.
Can I say a couple more that I just remembered
Yeah.
and noticed? One is The Descent, which is the one horror movie I think has to be recognized
Okay.
on here. One is Hard Candy, which if you guys haven't seen it, great little tense as F movie.
Yeah, I'll probably repeat some, but I have The Descent, Electra, The Phantom of the Opera, Hitch, Sin City, Fever Pitch, Reefer Madness, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the Will Ferrell Kicking and Screaming, Star Wars: Revenge of the Sith, The Longest Yard, Land of the Dead, War of the World. Is that it? War of the Worlds? It's it. Whatever. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Wedding Crashers, The Devil's Rejects, Sky High, Red Eye, Transporter 2, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, Corpse Bride, Flight Plan, A History of Violence, The Squid and the Whale, Saw 2, Chicken Little, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, another Christmas one, Just Friends, and then a formative one for me, probably one of the big reasons I met my wife, Rent, The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, The Family Stone, the Fun with Dick and Jane, The New World, and The Producers. Best Picture worthy, I have Cinderella Man, Batman Begins, and Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit.
Very nice. Love that. Yeah, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is the big one. I didn't mention it because it wasn't one of my childhood favorites, but that's one where I would easily put it in my 5, even over probably 4 of these movies here. But we'll get there in a sec. Stacey, did the other title pop in your mind at all?
No, but documentary Grizzly Man.
Cool.
Also very, very good.
Also, I have to mention, I've never seen it, but I know Carly's listening, and I need to mention Howl's Moving Castle. Also a very good film that I need to bring up. So that is another 2005 joint there. But enough of the films that didn't make it. Let's talk about what did. Obviously, this is the year of the upset, so I did really want to highlight this chart, especially these months. Is going to be really interesting to see exactly where the Academy was at, because look at this, guys. Brokeback Mountain wins Globes. It wins BAFTA. It wins PGA. It wins Critics' Choice. Crash wins the SAG Ensemble Award, which isn't on here, but that is one of the last awards before the Oscars. A lot of people say that the SAG win was what kind of gave it the momentum because all the actors got up on stage and made a speech. But if you notice, Crash didn't even get nominated for a Globe, and the only movie that got nominated for everything was Good Night and Good Luck. So a very weird Oscar year where Capote, Crash, and Munich all miss the Globe. Munich only gets Critics' Choice. It doesn't get PGA or BAFTA. So Munich, a huge surprise on the day. And of course, the win. I mean, Brokeback Mountain had swept pretty much every industry award and still lost Best Picture to Crash. And what did win the musical or comedy category, I actually have on my next chart, which is the next one in chart, which was Walk the Line. So like the big 3 movies that got snubbed that people thought probably could have gotten in. Constant Gardener was the one that got a BAFTA nomination. It got Critics' Choice, it got Globes. It got nominated everywhere, but it missed Picture. Walk the Line won the Globe for musical or comedy, so people thought that would get in. Also getting a PGA nom. King Kong was like the big tech player of the year. So if there were 10 nominees, it's very likely King Kong would have been one of them. But because there were only 5, I can see how it was only a tech thing. And then some other things. Memoirs of a Geisha was a big tech player as well. It got 6 Oscar nominations, but didn't get Best Picture. As Chad mentioned, Cinderella Man, it only really got a good showing at Critics' Choice, but people thought that could have given it enough. Other movies that were on the bubble: History of Violence, Match Point, Pride and Prejudice. I heard Stacy's which makes me think maybe the movie popped into her head. I'm not sure. Stacy, did it pop in there?
It was History of Violence was the other one I couldn't remember.
DC film.
There we
Yeah,
go. We eventually got there.
it's very, very good.
Nice. Yeah,
Just
everyone thought so as well, but unfortunately it didn't make the cut. So of those, a lot of people probably thought Constant Gardener and Walk the Line might take the spots of like Munich and maybe Capote, or even Crash, but ultimately that is the 5 that made it. And look at that, Crash not winning a single precursor that really matters, but still winning Best Picture, which is why it is one of the most surprising. But we will definitely talk about that when we get to the actual individual conversation. So we'll save all that talk for when we get to Crash, and also when we get to Brokeback Mountain in a sec, as to why we thought they might have lost or might have won besides just the precursors. Nothing else really to note about the Oscar ceremony in general because of the moment of Best Picture kind of being the thing people talk about. There's really not a lot else to talk about. I mean, Ang Lee became the first non-white winner of Best Director, which was very cool, very monumental. Again, something that's not really talked about because of the Crash moment. People don't really remember that Ang Lee broke history, made history at the time, winning Best Director. Keira Knightley was the second youngest Best Actress nominee ever. George Clooney became the first person ever to be nominated for directing, screenplay, and acting for different films. So he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor and won for Syriana. He was nominated for directing and picture for Good Night and Good Luck. So that was really cool. And no actor had ever done that across 2 films. And then John Williams tied Alfred Newman as the second most nominated individual in Oscars history because he got nominated for 2 scores that year for Memoirs of a Geisha and Munich. So John Williams would not become the most nominated yet, but he at least tied the second most at this awards. But very quickly afterward, he would then jump into the number 1 spot, which I believe he still has, which is pretty cool. And he probably always will have. I don't see many people catching him, at least anytime soon. But that's a lot about the Oscars. Any last thoughts right now before we actually dive into these 5 films? I know we've done a lot of preambling, but it's important because this is a very important year. Stacey, anything for you?
I think that this Oscar ceremony contained 2 upsets, at least for me it did. And we'll
Interesting.
talk about that when we talk about the movies.
All
But
right.
yes, I
Very
think
excited.
there's 2 major upsets that year.
All right. Chad, anything else from you before we dive in?
I mean, just like thinking about the trajectory of Brokeback Mountain, and just one like little passion movie comes out and just goes surprise. It's just like what? So yeah, it'll be fun to talk about these.
Yeah, it didn't just break dreams, it broke backs, because we're going to be starting off with the big movie that everyone thinks about when they think about this year. It's not the one that won, but it's the one that lost. Let's talk about Brokeback Mountain, kicking things off with a very big, bold conversation. Chad, tell us about Brokeback Mountain.
Absolutely. Brokeback Mountain, directed by Ang Lee, written by Larry McMurtry and Diana Osana, cinematography by Rodrigo Prieto, music by Gustavo Santaolalla, starring Heath Ledger, Jake Gyllenhaal, Michelle Williams, Anne Hathaway, Randy Quaid, Linda Cardellini, Anna Faris, David Harbour, Roberta Maxwell, and Kate Mara. Synopsis: 2 cowboys fall in love and struggle to explore their relationship further against, like, I don't know, a backdrop of homophobia.
Yeah, absolutely. Good description. I'm sure a lot of people watching this have watched this one. I think this is the one that has probably endured the test of time most in terms of visibility, and the conversation, for good at least. I think Crash also is very much talked about, but for other reasons. But let's start off with you, Stacey, because I know this is one of the main reasons you wanted to be on this, not just to talk about the Crash upset at the time as a firsthand POV of it,
Right.
but just also because you, spoiler alert, love this movie. So I mean, you did rewatch, so maybe you don't love it anymore, but I have a feeling you do. You wore the ponytail, you wore the flannel. Tell us, what are your thoughts on Brokeback Mountain, Stacey?
Well, I had an interesting point of view coming into this movie because I was actually already a big Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal, and actually even an Ang Lee fan. So the description has some words that you would never think you'd find me in the theater, which is cowboys in love. And not because they go together, because those 2 words on their own normally are things I'm not interested in. But because of the cast and the director, I was very interested in seeing this. It's so beautiful. Like, I remember sitting in the theater watching it and actually thinking this better be nominated for Best Cinematography. Like, the way it is shot is just so beautiful. The performances are amazing. The risk that Gyllenhaal and Ledger took being in this, like, you guys don't even know. Like, at the time, people were really, like, kind of horrified that they did it. and they, had a very close bond from kind of sharing in that experience, and remained very good friends. And Heath Ledger met his wife while filming. They fell in love sledding. But I know a lot of background apparently. um, um, but no, like I think the story is beautiful. It's heartbreaking. I've seen it quite a few times. I mean, I haven't watched it as much as like Lord of the Rings by any means, but this most recent rewatch was one of many, and it never really loses its luster for me. I'm always thinking I'll go in and I'm like, well, I might get bored because it's not a movie you'd necessarily think of as a Stacy movie, but I
Mm.
don't really get bored. I think that's just a tribute to the beautiful cinematography and the performances, which are the best of the year.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit, but yeah, I like how you said rewatchability, because this is a movie that like it's a slow burn. I mean, that first like 40 or so minutes where they're on the mountain, it's a very slow burn, and that's kind of why I don't cater to westerns. I don't love westerns because I'm not
Right.
the biggest fan of the kind of slow languid pacing of it. Whereas like for a drama, especially a talkie drama, I don't mind the slow burn, for especially if something that just like exists in the atmosphere. I'm not always the biggest fan of that. So I do agree. It's like very perplexing that like this movie somehow has that little extra tinge to it that like still makes it accessible and makes it rewatchable. I always think the same thing. I'm always fearing the rewatch just because I'm like, it is very long and it is dense and it does take its time. It's very tranquil, but I think there's something about it. Maybe it's the performances, maybe it's just the fact that it is such an innovative piece of art in and of itself for what it's tackling thematically that still keeps it so riveting. And I do agree. I think it's one of those movies that, yeah, just the rewatchability is the most surprising thing, because, any other very slow burn Western is never going to be on a top 10 list of most rewatchable movies. Everyone goes to action
Right.
movies, they go to comedies, they go to movies that they can physically engage with by either pumping their
Mhm.
fists going, yeah, or laughing out loud, or even crying. And that might be kind of why people go back to this. But, there's not a physical response you have to this movie. At least I don't,
Mhm.
but it's still a very interesting one. Like I'm very engaged throughout, which I can't say about most Westerns. I love a lot of Westerns, but not for the reasons um, that involve entertainment value. It's more so for the craft or for the
Right.
thematic stuff, and I feel like this one, it is exciting somehow, even though it's not built to be exciting. It's built to be very peaceful and almost melancholic at times, which I think is very cool. But Chad, what are your thoughts having rewatched Brokeback Mountain, because this was a rewatch for all of us, and I know you were very fond of it. Has your opinion of it gone higher, stayed the same, has it gone down? Let us know.
I mean, with
Oh,
that question, I think it's only no, I mean, it hasn't gone down. With that
okay.
question, it's either stayed the same or it has gotten a little higher. And the only reason I say that is because I normally do cry during Brokeback Mountain, but this time I couldn't handle myself. Like I was like crying so hard that it was just like, it was just really tough.
It's the
Um,
exhaustion crying, where it's like you've cried so much you can't cry anymore. You almost feel
yeah,
physically ailed by it. Yeah.
I didn't get to that level, but
Okay. That's
it
what I
was
don't know.
but it's just the sheer power of this movie. And like I said at the top, like Stacy was kind of, I think, alluding to a little bit, is that like times have changed so drastically that we see
Mhm.
like, I feel like, around then, homosexuality was being embraced more, but it still was a thing that especially in like high school people would make fun of. And like Stacy was talking about, like the it being a like ahead of its time kind of level piece that the actors were doing, like uh being in a movie like this together, especially being like two straight actors doing it, really stretching their craft. It just, I think it's only gotten, well, I think it's gotten even more, maybe less relevant, because it is a tragic story, a tragic love story. But I think it still stays in the culture because it's one of those where it's like still on the frame of um, what people had to go through back then,
Mhm.
especially in the area in which Ennis and Jack live, where they have to go to and they talk about this. They have to go out in the middle of nowhere to be together, and how hard is it for them to do it, like stay away from each other for like 4 years, and then you know, the talk of getting together and having a ranch together is laughable. Like now that's no problem, but like, and I know this is like, it takes place in the past, before 2005, right?
Yeah, and Michelle Williams is washing clothes on a washboard. That's when
Yeah,
it
yeah.
takes.
So even still, it's even further in the past, so you can
Yeah.
still see
60s,
just
the
how
60s.
yeah, just how unaccepted this kind of thing was, where it's like a huge thing. I love this movie because of the love story. Things always change. I used to kind of hate Michelle Williams's character, you know, because she's, you know, you could say that she's homophobic and stuff like that, but it's really tough when you have a character like that, where it's like, you know, someone who was raised in a society that just doesn't accept that kind of thing, and then you find out that your husband is basically cheating on you, and not like what you would normally think would be cheating, but you know, being with another man. It's just like so taboo and so like weird at that time, that you know, I feel sorry for her, and I feel, you know, bad for her, but then I also just feel so bad for these two characters, because you know, I love them so much. I love their love story and their relationship, because opposite of Stacy a little bit there, I really love a good love story, and like this one really just gets me every single time, because you know, you can tell that these, you know, the actors, these performances, that they really do fall in love with each other. It's not just a fling for them, but it's like this deep love, and it's so, you know, tragic that they can never ever fully be themselves together, and you know, out in public, and just, you know, really feel that. And then, you know, spoiler, of course we do get into spoilers and picture this, you know, when Jack dies, it just kind of cuts that off, and then you know that they never, and just like seeing the weight of that, and seeing, you know, just the weight of like hanging up those clothes at the end for, you know, Ennis to look up and just go, God, you know, what does he say? What's the great line is like, you know, God damn it, Jack, or something like that, or um but it's just one of those things where it's like, you know, just piece of clothes can just hold so much weight and symbolism
Mm.
of like a, you know, a deep tragic love that can never be. And it's just, I just think about the permanence of
Mhm.
that. And yeah, that's all the stuff that I'm thinking about when I'm watching the movie, and I just can't help but cry. And as I
Yeah.
get older, and you know, uh I'm not getting any younger, I start thinking about stuff like that. And you
Mhm.
know, just if I could never have, like, you know, the love that I have right now, and you know, I have to pretend my entire life, I just don't know how that's even a life.
Mhm. A good point. Stacey, you were gonna interject with the line. Do you know the line?
Yeah. Oh, I don't know the line, no,
Oh,
but there
okay.
was a couple of things I
Yeah, yeah.
wanted to say. One, that not that this makes it okay, but I don't think homosexuality was understood then. Like, I think people thought it was some weird choice that was,
Mhm.
you know, outside the lines of, it would be like, you know, if you're had multiple wives or something, like they just thought it was a anti-society type of choice. And that was part of where it came from, all the prejudice and hatred. Not that that makes it okay that people acted how they did about it, but I do think that that should be said, that definitely they didn't think it was something you were born, you know, liking one, you know, men or women or both.
And
Um,
oh, sorry, I thought you
no,
were
go
done.
ahead, say what you want to say, and
I
then
I
I'll
was just
say
gonna
the other thing.
I was just gonna say, yeah, because I know Dylan hasn't really talked about at all yet either. But I
I
did
did. I talked
that
about the rewatchability and everything. We're good.
that's
We're
right.
good.
You did get into it a little bit.
No,
That's
it's
true.
fine. Yeah, yeah.
That's
I
right.
want to hear what you guys have to
Um,
say. I have thoughts. I'm writing notes down as it goes. Listen. We've done this show for 3 years. This is how
a
it
great
works.
way to
We're
do
good.
it.
We're good.
Yeah, no, because it plays into the whole thing about, you know,
Jack Nat.
masculine versus feminine, and if you're if you're homosexual around that time, especially, maybe even today people might think this, that you can't be homosexual and super masculine and stuff like that. You can't take care of your family, you can't do all of these things that like tough men can do. The whole toxic masculinity thing that was really big then, still big now, and I don't know if it'll ever go away, but that whole thing where Jack's father-in-law won't let him cut his own turkey, and is like, my grandson's gonna have the TV on, damn it, and then he has to stand up for for his house and himself. And that's one scene that I absolutely love, because I think it says so much about, like, just because someone's gay, like they're people too, and they're the same exact thing as you are. And I think a lot of people who are homophobic can watch this and learn something.
The two other things I wanted to talk about was when after Jack dies and Ennis goes to his parents about getting the ashes, you can tell his parents knew that this was the love of Jack's life. And the way the father reacts versus the way the mother reacts, I think, is just a beautiful illustration of what the times had to say. Like, the mother is very much like, I loved my son and my son loved you, so I love you. She never says that. It's all in the performances, which is so amazing. And the dad is like, you're gross. You made my son gross. Get the fuck out of my house. Like, it's so obvious. And then the other thing I wanted to say was, one thing I noticed for the first time on this rewatch, and I honestly don't even know how many times I've rewatched this movie, so the fact that I'm discovering new things is amazing. The shirts, which usually I'm just crying, and that's probably why I've never noticed this before. But when we see the shirt in Jack's closet, we see Jack's shirt over Ennis's shirt, which I kind of feel like he's holding Ennis. But then at the end, when we see it in Ennis's closet, it's Ennis's shirt over Jack's shirt. Like, he's holding Jack back. And I just think that's such a beautiful illustration of what this movie does and how so much is done without words. And like I said, I just noticed that for the first time on this watch. I'm sure there's other things that, you can discover. So
it's like the visual symbolism, and even like that famous still from the movie is him, with his arms wrapped around him. It's like very much about that physical intimacy and like the protection aspect. I'll protect you, and then later on in life, he needs to protect him. Like there are different stages in their life where this is not a dom sub relationship. It's very even, and I think that's also something to be said. That most heterosexual romances, it's always the man protecting the woman, but now you have this homosexual romance on screen, and it's showing that there is a different, because the gender is the same, there's different expectations on how one party acts in a relationship versus the other. And I think that's very well conveyed. Yeah. Cool. Well, I got my notes. I was gonna say, I love when you brought up Michelle Williams being homophobic. It was something I never even thought of, but now like I can understand why people would think that, because it is very much not just he's cheating on me, but like that it is this guy. But
Jack Nasty, when she calls him Jack Nasty, more like it, or whatever she says.
But I also feel like there is that something to be said about, like, if a woman had driven up and he would have taken her and started kissing her and she saw that, I feel like she would still have a very similar response. But it's true that she has that added stuff on top of it. And that's why I think this movie is so successful, is because even though the wives have their own opinions, as Stacey said, that was kind of the social opinion of the time. It doesn't make them, any better than the people now, but it obviously, that's just what the social norm was. So you can't really fault them too much for thinking like he's committing this big sin. But it's also like, we still, despite those flaws, still understand where the wives are coming from. And I think that's the thing that this movie does really well, is that it's not just about Jack and Ennis, but you can also see how it affects their wives. And I think that a lesser movie would have made the wives completely just one-noted villains, and I think that's something that this film doesn't do. You can understand why this is tough for them, not even the gayness, but just the cheating in and of itself. But you also don't completely villainize the couple either, because you understand that they have to be together. So it's this really interesting balance where you're like, no, what they're doing to their wives is terrible. It really is, because it is, leading them down this illusion, but at the same time you understand 100% why they need to be with each other. So it's like that double-edged sword, and I think that's what's so nice about this movie, is there isn't an easy answer to anything, but also because that is, as you both have said, the times that this film is portraying, and then looking at the times of the audiences viewing them. And I think this is what Chad touched on a little bit about the machismo and the, the masculinity and the toxic masculinity. I mean, look at it in terms of genre. I mean, the Western genre in and of itself is a very masculine, macho genre. We saw it 10 years later, 15 years later with Power of the Dog as well. This movie that is very deeply rooted in homosexuality themes, a very gay film. And a lot of people are like, nope, can't do it. Nope, no gayness in my Westerns. And I think that's the thing, is it's not just a gay love story, because Rent comes out the same year. There's a lot of gayness in that film, but it's an upbeat musical. It has sad parts, but it's a musical where everyone's in the village and everyone's singing and everyone's free and expressive. This is not that. And I think that's what's so impactful, especially, is that this is not just a gay romance, but it's a gay Western. And I think that was so challenging. And we can get into the talk about the upset, but I think that's mostly why it was not even watched by some Academy members, because they just couldn't fathom this very white masculine genre being infiltrated by gayness. And I think that's one of the big things that this movie has kind of defied over time and people have come around to, because you had so many gay films before this, but they were always smaller indies about these offbeat people in these very gay accepting places. They were comedies, they were musicals, they were never tackling things in this gaze, in this genre. And I think that's what's most intriguing, is that you're taking something that is so masculine and their relationship is still very masculine. You know, the sex, it's not delicate. And I think it's purposely made to be that way. It's very intense. It's very what?
Dylan, you kind of froze for a second, and now you're off. Your like audio and video, it was not.
It was right before you started talking about.
I'm gonna leave and come back. Just give me a second.
Okay.
All right, my computer's homophobic. Let me get back.
Apparently.
Let me leave and come back.
It was like, the sex is
and then his computer went nuts. It was
the sex is what? What was the sex like?
Sex is crazy. It's wild. I could talk about this movie for probably the whole show.
That's the only thing, is like, when you get to movies like this, some of them it's interesting, because like some you get like the best movies ever made or something like that, and you'll get to, like, we got to Star Wars and then we're like,
what do you say about Star Wars at this point?
How do you talk about Star Wars?
Yeah,
it's really good.
Yeah, I mean,
and so this one I feel like, because there's so much about like it being like ahead of its time and stuff like that, there is a lot to get into. But also, you know, more so with Dylan, I think there was more personal stuff with Star Wars. But for me, you know, and you with Heath Ledger, and then me, like, I don't know, just loving a really, really great love story. I just feel very connected to this one.
Yeah, the word that was used at the time when it was good, after the movie came out and everyone was like, oh, this is good, then Heath and Jake were just called brave a lot. It's a brave career choice. It's brave to do the movie. And
I mean, I was sitting there thinking that when I was watching it, I was like, man, they really went for it here.
They really went for it.
this movie.
Okay. Can you hear me clearly?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Better.
Did you guys continue, or did you?
Yes, we did a little bit.
All right. So I'll just have to find it in the edit then, because I wrote down a time code, because it's fine. I'll figure it out later. It's fine.
It was
we continued talking about it, but not. We just were talking about it.
Okay, so it wasn't part of the. Okay, so good.
I mean, you can decide if it's part of the show.
You cut out right after you mentioned how the sex was. Yeah, we were kind of joking a little bit about that. Like, how was the sex?
All I heard was, oh, after I said that, I was like, what? You know? Yeah. All right, so I'll just go back to what I was saying. I mean, the relationship is not delicate. It's masculine. I mean, the sex scenes themselves are very macho. You know, it's very heavy. It's very manly. And I think that's also part of it too, is that, you know, men who were very uncomfortable with their sexuality, or, you know, had this idea of what macho was and just traditional romances, were probably a little uncomfortable by it, because they were kind of feeling this infiltration in a way in their own genre, in their own idealistic mindset of what a relationship should or shouldn't be. So I just think that's very interesting. And I think the genre of it all is really what makes it unique and innovative, but also what I think made it polarizing at the time, especially.
Yeah. I mean, the sex is actually I mean, they don't have a lot of sex in the movie, but it's aggressive. Like, there's a lot of aggression. and then they, multiple times they get in physical fights, like, because they don't know what to do with how they feel, because they can't,
Yeah.
he thinks he knows that they can't do anything about it, and Jack is just convinced that they can have a happy life somewhere in a ranch,
Yeah.
like,
It's
oh,
it's like so like built up,
mhm,
like you're saying, like so messy and awkward at times
mhm,
because of that, because it's so built up and they just don't know how to operate this new life that they're experiencing. And like, they probably always knew that there was something different about them but couldn't express it. And then, when you get there, like, there's like not a lot of words and stuff like that. It's not like they sit there and go, "You're gay, right?" They don't
right,
do that. It's all wordless, and they just like start kissing one time, and it's just like so, yeah. But then also when you get, because to Dylan's point, when you get to the point, right after, I think, like their big first like time together on Brokeback Mountain, um and they have to be apart for a long time, or for, as far as they know, forever. And you see Ennis Del Mar break down, and let's just sit there and cry like on his knees, against a wall. I just think that's such a powerful shot too, of just like that's the life that I want to live, but I might not never
mm,
have that. And then, yeah, just the tough exterior breaking down and just saying like, this is all an act. This is
Hmm.
just a front that I have to keep up because this is how I'm expected to live.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that to an extent, but I feel like they do at least a good enough job of showing that he does have at least care for his wife and kid. I mean,
yeah,
obviously he does things
Hmm.
that are very careless, like obviously the fishing. No, it breaks my heart every time she's like, "I left that note
Hmm.
on the fishing line,"
mhm,
and it's like, like, if you're gonna
Yeah.
commit to the front, at least pull out the fishing pole. But at the same time, again, you understand why he is the way he is and
oh, yeah,
why he's invested in this relationship, even though it's crushing to know that, like, she tried her best to give him every opportunity to at least play along and make her think that nothing was up, but he fumbled it in that aspect. But you understand both sides, and I think also bringing the daughter back around at the end also helps with that too, to show that, like,
mhm,
yes, this relationship was real, I love this man, but also, like, you are my family. This is my family. Same thing with like Jake Gyllenhaal standing up to the father-in-law, and like that's a great moment of love for his wife. But it's just a different type of love. It's not fueled in romance as much as it is, support and
Hmm.
wanting to build a foundational family with them. That is all true. I think they genuinely want to build lives and families with their people as well. It's just the love is somewhere else, if that makes
yeah.
sense.
I think that in the beginning, Ennis really does love Alma in a romantic kind of way, but
Yeah.
he comes to resent the fact that this is the life he's stuck in,
Hmm.
and he's really more in love with somebody else. And at
Right.
that point, probably not really in love with her at all. But I do think going into it, he was, what he thought was romantic love was there.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
maybe it wasn't romantic love, but he thought it was. But the
And
way they
again,
act, you do see a good relationship between them in the beginning.
and because of the time, it's like you're conditioned to believe that
Mhm.
that's what you have to do. So it helps
Yeah.
in aiding that idea of, oh, I am in love with this person. Obviously, like I have
Right.
to marry a woman. I have
Yeah.
to have a kid.
I imagine, yeah, I do think there was some love there for Alma, but I think it was more of a companionship kind of a
Right.
thing, more
Mhm.
than some deep love. Because there were times, I think Jack is saying something about Alma, and then he defends Alma, like,
Mhm.
don't talk about Alma like that,
Hmm.
kind of a deal. And then you have the scene at the end with his daughter, Kate Mara, and I think her name is also Alma.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
Elma
she's Alma
Junior.
and
Junior. She's an
okay,
Alma Junior.
she's a
Poor
junior.
thing. Poor thing.
but but yeah, I love that scene because she's unsure if he's gonna be there for her when she's
Mhm.
getting married, and he's like, "Screw my job, I don't care.
Right.
You're getting married. You're my daughter. I love you." And then as soon as she leaves, he goes right back to his true love, the clothes, the coat
Mhm.
on the door. And I just love that like dynamic where it's like he has to live both of these lives, but it's who he is. He has all these attachments, and he can't fully be there for, I guess, either. But I don't know. I'm rambling now.
Bill, did this win Best Adapted Screenplay? I don't
It did.
remember.
So
Okay.
this was
Thank
okay.
God.
We can kind
Story.
of get into the actual upset talk a little bit now. We can talk more about it when we get to Crash as well. But I think a big part of why this was a little bit surprising was because Crash was an original and Brokeback was an adapted. So it was like, okay, even though they both won, that didn't hurt it. It's not like Crash beat Brokeback for adapted, because if you look at the other categories, I mean, Brokeback won score, but it also, it beat it in director. Ang Lee won director. Crash didn't win anything else except for screenplay and I believe maybe editing. Hold on, let me pull it up. I should have been more prepared for this. Yeah, so it won editing. So that was the big tell, was the editing. So when Crash beat Brokeback in editing, people were like, oh, maybe it's gonna win. But then Brokeback won its screenplay, and then Brokeback won director. So I think going into the night, it's like, well, one has editing, one has director. They both have screenplay, but like Brokeback's been winning everything. It won PGA, it won Critics' Choice, it won BAFTA, it won Globe. So like I think at the time it was close because they were each in their own lane for a screenplay. But I really do think most people were still surprised at the end of the day. I think if Paul Haggis had won director, then everyone would have been like, oh, Crash is winning. But I think, an editing win alone was not enough to convince people that it had the edge over Brokeback, which I think is, again, what makes it so much more surprising, because Ang Lee does win Best Director. And I think that's the biggest thing, is like, no, it was the best directed film, so it's going to win the Best Picture, of course. Because at the time, they rarely split. You know what I mean?
Right. So to speak to the upset a little bit, as far as this movie is concerned, going into these Oscars, your chart makes it look very clear. But at the time, I didn't feel personally like Brokeback was a sure thing. I felt like there was still a lot of people who did not want to vote for the gay cowboy movie, especially in the Academy, which is a lot of older male, especially at that time. It was definitely an older male dominated Academy voting. And, to me, it felt a little bit like the underdog. Like, I wasn't surprised at all by the winner. I, was upset by the winner, but I wasn't surprised by it. And maybe in the industry with people that do follow all the awards, it was a big upset. For me, it was a big personal upset. I didn't feel as though it was a sure thing. I mean, it had momentum and I was rooting for it, and I knew it had a chance. Like, it was definitely in the race, but I just thought there was too much still homophobia out there.
That's a good point, because I think people like me, like Chad, who look into, okay, it's won all these precursors, it's going to win. It's just been sweeping the season, but I think you bring up a good point, which is the public perception of just like, Crash was still a crowd pleaser. Brokeback wasn't necessarily that. I think there were a lot of fans of it, but it was, you got to sometimes think, the audience perception isn't everything, but it is something. It does aid somehow in how the Academy percieves things, because it's what generally builds or, deafens a hype for something.
I mean,
and I think.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry. Well, because you're talking about the audience, and so I just want to say, just by my viewing experiences in theaters, like if you were going to award something based on that, Crash won hands down.
Right.
Like,
and I think that's what people are underestimating. Yeah. Just the fact that, the public perception was so strong. And, this year, maybe the Academy did line up more with the public perception because of the taboos,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because my viewing experience of Brokeback was in a little indie theater with like 4 people in it, and I loved it. Like I said, I was like, this needs to get nominated Best Cinematography, but it wasn't like a big movie going experience. And I don't know if you want me to talk about my viewing experience of Crash now, or if
No, we'll get into it later. Cool. Chad, any thoughts on the upset from Brokeback side? We've talked about why we thought it probably lost, but any reactions now before we get into Crash in just a little bit?
I mean, not much. I wasn't really Oscar minded around then. I wasn't really watching all that much. Just maybe a little bit off and on, stuff like that. So I just really wasn't, there. I don't think any of these movies are like, it sounds weird, like people saying Crash is a crowd please. I know we'll get to it, that discussion, but for like, just getting ahead of it, I think it's weird to call any of these movies crowd pleasers because they're all so dour.
Yeah, I don't want to get into my thoughts on the other movies, but this is the coldest slate I think we've ever
Yeah.
covered. Like every
Yes.
movie is very cold and bitter, and
Mhm.
at times maybe a little too frigid. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. Yeah. Stacey, you did allude to maybe another upset. Was this the other upset you were thinking of, or do you want to save that for later?
I mean, I can say what it was, but it will reveal a pick later. So I don't know if you want me
Then
to.
we can save it for acting conversations then, because you'll
Okay.
probably highlight it first because you are
Oh,
first
I
time
will.
actor. Yeah, no
I have
worries.
a lot to say
So
about that.
the thing with these episodes with the upset, this is our first episode. This is our pilot of this series. So
Mhm.
we're still figuring out the kinks. So when we talk about the upsets themselves, we'll have to kind of figure out the fine tune of like, do we talk about it now? Do we talk about it when we get to the one that actually won? So we'll get a little bit more into Brokeback probably when we talk about Crash in just a sec. But
Right.
for now, we will leave everyone with this. Brokeback Mountain wins 3 awards out of the 8 it is nominated for. It wins Best Director for Ang Lee. It wins Best Adapted Screenplay, as we said, and it wins Best Original Score, as we said. Very deserved win for score. It was not the predicted winner. That was a big upset for sure. I remember reading into it. Did not win any precursors, but won Best Score, which is very, very cool. It was nominated for Best Picture, Best Actor for Heath Ledger, Best Supporting actor for Jake Gyllenhaal, and Best Supporting Actress for Michelle Williams, and cinematography. So those are the awards that it was nominated for but didn't win. And what did win one of the awards that it was nominated for that it lost, Heath Ledger lost to a different actor, an actor who's no longer with us, but what is often regarded as his masterwork, and that is Capote. So we're going to be talking about Philip Seymour Hoffman is the title role in the film, also titled after the character Capote.
Capote, directed by Bennett Miller, written by Dan Futterman, cinematography by Adam Kimmel, music by Michael Dana. Starring Philip Seymour Hoffman, Catherine Keener, Clifton Collins Jr., Chris Cooper, Bob Balaban, Bruce Greenwood, Amy Ryan, Mark Pellegrino, Marshall Bell, and Catherine Schindel. Synopsis: Truman Capote researches a cold-blooded murder in order to write his book entitled In Cold Blood, based on the novel Capote by Gerald Clark.
There you go. Capote, as I alluded to, the Oscar that won Philip Seymour Hoffman, his big elusive Oscar. I was looking, I wasn't sure if this was an upset. Obviously, a lot of great actors that way that year. But I'm wondering, looking at the precursors, yeah, he kind of swept everything. So this was mostly an actor player. So, this is one of those movies that is nominated more so for, the performance, probably more so than people being like, oh my God, this movie. They were mostly centered around the performance. But there's a lot of interesting things to talk about with the movie itself. I just have to ask, A, has anyone seen this before? And B, has anyone read In Cold Blood before? Yes.
Yes.
Surprisingly, no, I have not.
Okay, I'm a no for both as well. So, Chad, I'm going to start with you then because you have read In Cold Blood. I also feel like we should start with you because you are obviously a Bennett Miller stan. You're the reason why Moneyball. I said Moneyball. Moneyball is our Best Picture winner from 2011. Is because you did put it in the number 1 slot, and I believe I put it at 2 or 3. So you're a big Bennett Miller stan. So let us know what are your thoughts on Capote, but also you can give a little context for In Cold Blood because this is something I was unfamiliar completely with Capote and In Cold Blood. So this was basically just all fresh new information for me. So I'm very curious to what you thought, Chad. We'll start with you here.
Yeah, I think this is a great movie. I really love it. Maybe not on the same level as Brokeback, but I mean, honestly, I'm tipping something here, but not many movies do match up to that for me. But Capote, I think, is incredible. The reason why I had gotten into this a little bit prior to watching Capote was that it was right around the time that Serial came out, the podcast, the big famous podcast that actually like handled a crime that's like not far from here. It's only like miles from here. That a lot of people, not just me, started to really get into true crime podcasts. And so did Carrie. Carrie got really into true crime podcasts that like I was like, I guess I'll join in a little bit. And I started to really get into them as well. And then, she was talking about In Cold Blood as like one of the great like American novels. And if you look at it, it is like one of those like kind of landmark novels of true crime where it's like, I don't know if there's really anything truly sensational or spectacular about this crime that happened, but it was the fact that it just like was something that really caught on.
And it wasn't
Um,
fictionalized either, because like a
yeah,
lot of the
yeah,
literature
and
at the time, yeah, it was like To Kill a Mockingbird, which we
yeah,
literally hear about in this one, but it's a complete work of
yeah,
fiction.
yeah, and I think that's the uh one of the really big things. Sorry, Kara is messaging me about making sure everyone knows that Philip Seymour Hoffman is like her favorite acting performance in
Oh,
Capote.
nice.
Yeah, she loves it. She loves this movie, and in Cold Blood, just being like that kind of matter of fact like level of writing about something that's just so cold blooded, and it kind of goes to a lot of horror movies and why certain movies like Halloween and The Strangers and stuff like are scary. It's like, well, those are scary because there's like no motive.
Hmm.
There's just like a random killing that they wanted some money or something, and just the killing just happened. Um, kind of a deal. I think that's why this book like really like hits, is because it's so well researched, so well written, and just by like someone that is just so interesting. I find Truman Capote just a really interesting character. I think that's why this movie does really work for me. Is that it's weird because at first it feels like he cares, and then you see kind of doesn't care, like he's only putting up a front of caring for these people, because of he wants them to trust him so he can like get more information about writing his book. And then like you see him get like confronted by like death, and the doom of these people who having to go through, whether it was a mistake or whether it was just they didn't care and they just really wanted to kill those people. They have to be executed, and to see him like being confronted with that, but seeing like all of his relationships aside of that too, I just think it's like really interesting, like the conversations he has with the guy, and just talking about what actually happened. And I mean, you can't really get into a motive because like the guys even say, like one is more unhinged. Mark Pellegrino is really unhinged in the movie, which is kind of fun because he plays Satan in Supernatural.
Mm,
Which so
but
again
he
he's
does.
he knows, he's got experience in doing
Hmm.
that. But then you have Clifton Jr., who you really really feel bad for. Like you feel like sympathy for him because he just seems like, at first he seems kind of like maybe he didn't do it, and then he like reveals like, and then I shot those people, and like he actually did do it. But it's one of those where it just, he doesn't really feel like a cold-blooded killer. So it's just it's such an interesting case, while also being kind of, I think it was because it was like the monsters that infiltrated this small, quiet, quaint town that did nothing to no one, kind of a deal. And I don't know. I just think this is a really interesting biopic, and I do think Philip Seymour Hoffman is like one of the great like performances. So
There you go. I don't really have much to add. Stacy, what are your thoughts on Capote?
Well, so I took notes because I watched this one at the very beginning of the month, and I
Mhm.
figured, I wanted things to be fresh. So I have my notes. The reason I had never seen this, because this is much more up my alley than Brokeback Mountain is, as far as thematically,
Right, the
as far
type
as
of
it
movie
goes.
it is. Yeah.
But I never saw it because I was mad about Philip Seymour Hoffman's win, and it kind of changed it for me a little bit.
Okay.
So I was glad that this was making me watch it, because I was always a little curious. And I also am one of those people who was like, well, can I say that he shouldn't have won if I haven't seen the movie? Um,
yeah.
How do you feel now?
how do I feel now? I don't feel like he was undeserving, but I don't feel like he was most deserving, if that
Mm.
makes
Interesting
sense.
way to put it. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, because
Yeah,
all the times, I mean, like every year we all have our favorites who win, but it's also like, just because someone beats the one you were rooting for doesn't necessarily make them more or less, deserving. But it is very interesting though when it is the opposite, where it's like someone who you thought was not even deserving at all wins. At least
right.
this is like one of those things where even though he might not be your best performance of the year, it's like no, you can still acknowledge like this
And
is
when we
his
talk
crown
actors,
jewel.
I'll explain why after seeing the movie, I still think that. because
Okay.
obviously it was
No,
biased
that's
at the
totally
time.
fine. Yeah.
But so yeah, he disappears into this role. Like no question, everything, every mannerism. I mean, obviously the voice is very obvious, but the way he holds a glass, the way he walks into a room, just the way he puts on a coat, like everything is, I guess, Capote, because he was real. So I'm guessing he got these things from him, or footage of him. I think starting. I'm sorry, I have notes, so I have a lot to say.
No, you're
I
good.
think starting with the murder made it such a grab right from the start.
Yeah.
It really pulled you right in. Clifton Collins Jr. I thought was fantastic because you did feel for him, but also there was always a sense of menace from him.
Mhm.
Even when you did sympathize with him, you thought but he might have done it.
Especially the moments where Philip Seymour, or I shouldn't say Philip Seymour Hoffman, where Capote is, giving him the medicine, or literally allowing himself to get close. He's in the cell with him. It's those moments where you're oh yeah, there's a deep connection, human bond there, and they're just people talking. But at the same time, you're always in the back of your mind, you're lingering. You're is he gonna jump and choke him to death? There's that
Right.
moment of just fear every single time, because it's no, this is still a cold-blooded killer. It is still someone who can, on the dime, just he's a criminal. And then that's
Right.
another thing too that makes it tense too. It's the idea of them not the barriers go away at a certain a point, which again aids to what you were saying, Stacey, of the whole thing where he can flip on a dime, but he's also
Right.
oddly
He
empathizable,
had that
as
sense of
Pat said.
menace,
Yeah.
but I think,
Right.
Clifton Collins Jr. really brought a lot to that, because I think a lot of that was in his silence in the performance, and that's not the easiest thing to do. I liked that the movie did not try to make him likable. I don't.
Yeah.
I know a little bit about. I know a little, probably a little bit more familiar with him in the book and stuff than Dylan is, but I have not read it, and I don't know a ton about him. But for one thing, I never could be sure if he was sincere. I think he was sincere. I think he wasn't sincere. I think he was sincere. I still don't know, honestly. I still am not. I think he was affected for sure after the fact. But while talking to these guys and while trying to get the story out of them, I don't know if he ever really felt bad or felt anything for them. I could not piece if he had any sincerity in it at all. And even his dealings with other people, I think the addition of who was it? Patricia Heaton, who plays the author of, was it
Harper Lee.
Yes, she plays Harper Lee. Was it Patricia Heaton?
Catherine Keener.
Catherine Keener,
Yeah.
that's right. Patricia Heaton's in a different one that we watched. Sorry. I should have had all this written down.
You're good.
I think she humanizes him quite a bit, and having her be almost like the surrogate to the audience, not like she's a surrogate for the audience, but almost like the bridge to the audience from him, because she makes him somewhat more likable, seeing him through her. Because I don't think I like him, but I like that a biopic allows him to be that way. He's just, I called him a pendulum, a narcissistic fascinating pendulum of a character is how I described him. At one point I thought, is he have a personality disorder? Because he has so little emotion all the time. I did not know that this was the first true crime novel written until I watched the movie, which the way they talk about it, I'm assuming it is. They never explicitly say that, I don't think, but and just like I said, his dealings with even his friends and stuff, he goes to Harper Lee's party about To Kill a Mockingbird and its success, and he's like, I don't see what the fuss is about. He's so narcissistic, incredibly.
That scene actively pissed me off, because Chad and I covered that movie 2 months ago, because it's the movie party. It's not the book. It's the
he
movie,
literally says that. I don't see what the fuss is about. It's just you're like, why do people hang out with you at all? Why do you have friends? Why do you have this boyfriend?
I think because he does kind of put on a face in the parties when he's and then I'm telling stories.
He's a character.
And then
he's a
on
big,
the side,
colorful character that on the periphery you could think seems like a fun guy you'd want to be friends with.
Yeah,
I can see that. And then I
Yeah.
guess maybe once you're sucked into the orbit, we all have friends that sometimes we go, why am I even friends with you? Like, how did this even happen? So like, it's probably one of those situations. But yeah, so overall, I thought the movie was really good. It did a lot I liked. I thought the pacing was good. I expected more of the trial, but I quickly came to learn it was more about him writing this story and talking to these guys than it was about their trial and that stuff and just investigating the murder. And so, yeah, like I said, I'm glad I watched it, and I think that he was not undeserving of
Mhm.
the award.
I
In
do
another
want to
year, I might have said that he was the best actor.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tough on that front.
Mhm.
Maybe they'll both get represented. We'll see. But I want to say I think it's great that you elaborated on his character because I touched on it, but you like went like harder into it. I think
Mhm.
that's like totally true. Is that the way it does the character in a lot of the times in a very unflattering way? Is that I feel like it's they're trying to get really true to who Truman Capote really was and
He is true man.
how right and how that probably factored into how he was able to write such a cold like just fact-based like book about
Mhm.
such a cold crime is that he wasn't able to really put uh, too many opinions into it. Like he could
Right.
be everything to everyone and nothing to no one, uh, or nothing to anyone, at all times. And I think that's great. And then the other thing that I wanted to touch on that you said was that you said that you thought maybe it would tie more into the court case, which we
Mhm.
all love a great courtroom movie. But I think like when I was sitting there watching it, every single time I watch this movie, I'm like, they should have called this In Cold Blood. It's a way cooler title than Capote. But
Right.
then you look it
Yeah.
up, and there's so many adaptations of that book In Cold Blood, where I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure a lot of them have the court case and they dive into that. And this one is more a biopic of Capote
Yeah.
writing that book, the thing that he's most well known for,
Mhm.
and stuff. So I think they did it kind of perfectly.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah, I haven't spoken on it yet, so I'll give my thoughts.
Oh yeah.
I'm a little I think I'm a little lower than you two on it, only because I didn't know anything about Capote or In Cold Blood, and I do think there's the big plus is that it isn't a biopic where it starts with the birth and then it goes to
Mhm.
his marriage and it goes to his career and then it ends
Right.
with his death. It doesn't do that, and I really love that about it. I love the biopics that are set around a certain event, like Lincoln,
Mhm.
or like Steve Jobs, where it's focused on one specific thing. The only thing though is that if you are a little alienated from it and you have no context, I feel like this film is not necessarily the best introduction to Capote and his
Mm,
life. But it definitely is for Capote the person, and I think that's very much what you guys have touched on. That this is first and foremost, and I think solely a character piece for me. Like I don't watch this because I'm
Mhm.
really invested in the crime of it all. I'm watching this because I'm invested in his mind and how it processes things. And like you both have said, the idea that he is this narcissist, that he is essentially, not a worse person than the ones who actually did the murdering, but in telling that story, in his obligation in telling a story that's truthful, but also swaying things and spinning things to make it for his own benefit. What is going to be the best read? What are people going to want to see?
Manipulative.
What does he
mhm.
do that is respectful of the subject versus what does he do that is all self-interested? I think that's the most interesting stuff in the movie, and that's why I think in terms of its screenplay, in terms of its performance, it is super successful. But it also kind of goes back to what we were saying with Brokeback, where it's like this is just such a cold slate that a lot of these movies after they ended, they left me feeling coldness in a way that
Mhm.
I just felt almost kind of nothingness after this. And I think that might be an effect of the film, but it is also something where like I don't see myself going back to it because it is so cold, because it is so just kind of raw and matter of fact in a way. And it's interesting because he is such a nuanced individual, but everything's presented so matter of factly that it's a very interesting kind of dichotomy that I really like. But now thinking about it, like Moneyball is kind of the same way. There's a little bit more of that emotional kind of heart that kind of seeps through, but that is a more heartfelt story than something like this. And I think this actually pairs more successfully with his other film, Foxcatcher, because that is another film that when I watch it, I'm just like, I don't want to cry, but I also don't I just feel nothingness because it is that numbness. I mean, these are very numbing films, and I think there's an effect for that. It's just, sometimes there's a place and time for it, and I feel like this is not one of those movies I'm likely to rewatch because it is so numb. It leaves you feeling kind of this sense of nothingness, but that's effective, and I think there's something to be said about a film that succeeds in doing what it's trying to do, which this film very clearly does. It's just I'm not like, wow, like, man, I love Capote, just because I'm like, wow, I'm more interested in it. I'm more like, wow, that's very interesting. Like, I'm very perplexed by it, and it is the type of biopic that now I want to lean in more. I want to kind of get to know more of this individual because it is such a small chapter of his life that I want to know a little bit more about his background, a little bit more about what happened to him and his other works, and actually reading the book and seeing how that translates. Again, because I'm so alienated and at a distance from that, like I didn't, I don't know, maybe the whole book thing, having read it, maybe I'll have an even deeper appreciation for it in the same way that I appreciate the Harper Lee stuff because we've seen To Kill a Mockingbird, we've discussed it on this show. So that's not to say I didn't like it. It's just, it is one of those movies that left me so cold that I'm like, geez, like I was just kind of taken aback by it because it is just so unconventional, but I appreciate that about it. I think that's one of the strong
like his personality.
Exactly. It's someone who leaves you cold, even though he's cracking jokes, even though he has a
So
personality.
manipulative.
Yeah, exactly. It leaves you feeling a certain way. And I do think the movies that portray criminals in a way that does not justify what they are doing or try to make them a hero or try to like excuse them from what they're doing, but at least give us enough empathy as to understand maybe why, not even why they did it, but like just understand that they are still a person. There's humanity there, even though it is lost. I think that is sometimes the most interesting filmmaking as well, because you have your Green Miles where he is innocent, but you also have these types of films where it is, I think very obvious from the start that he's not, but that's the effect of the film. It's like, but you're watching him befriend this guy and you're actually kind of understanding the friendship in a way. But then, as we've talked about, like, it's not a real friendship. It's used more for personal gain. But is it? Does he actually feel remorse at the end? And I think that's what is most interesting about this is the morality play. And I think this is something we'll talk about with several more films that we're going to talk about in this slate, because it's kind of that whole approach of, trying to show people who are flawed in a different light, not because you're trying to excuse their behavior, but you're trying to just understand it. And I think that's kind of what this film is doing. So I've actually kind of sold myself more on the film as I've talked about it, because I was going to this being like, oh man, that was bleak, but now I'm like, you know what? There's a purpose to it. There's definitely an effect.
Yeah, he was so manipulative of Clifton Collins Jr. That's his name, right? I felt bad for him in a way, just because he thought they were really friends. Like he really, really thought that this guy's in his corner and they're friends, and then he's trying to reach out to him after he gets his ending to his book and just being ignored. And again, like he was such, what he did now, which was in cold blood. There is no why to it even, really. And he even says, like, if you did it for what, $37 or something. I don't know what the price was, what the amount was, but like it was ridiculous. And even after that, I still have sympathy for how he's treated by Capote.
Right.
He just did an excellent job. I think he should have gotten talked about more, to be honest. I don't remember the nominees for supporting, but I think
he wasn't nominated, right?
He was not nominated.
No.
But there's a little twist to our show where we can put up whoever we want from these movies. It doesn't have to be a nominee that was nominated for an Oscar. So.
So I just wanted to throw that in there about the manipulation, because it was something I hadn't actually written, or if I did write it down, I skimmed over it because I didn't read my notes verbatim. And it was just incredible. Like I said, I think that he might have a personality disorder himself, for sure. Like besides narcissism, which is completely obvious. But
a little sociopathy too,
beyond that. Exactly.
Definitely. Yeah, he's definitely got a touch of the So I was trying to make a sociopathy.
Sociopathy. I think I said something like that in a review once, and Chad called me out for it, but it's okay.
Probably.
I don't know. You know, pronounce it. I don't know.
Do words.
Any last thoughts, Chad?
I just quickly, because you guys were like talking, like bringing up some great points about just how prisoners or criminals are treated in society. I mean, I'm like 100% against the death penalty. I don't think that should be a thing. I don't think that's the right of the government to do that to people, especially because people are sometimes innocent, but it's just the fact that can people be rehabilitated and stuff like that? It's a whole other conversation, but I think that does help humanize these people, like maybe less so Mark Pellegrino's character because he just seemed like he doesn't give a shit. But that's the thing this with Clifton Jr. you guys touched on, is that it's not that I thought that he might not have been involved at all. I knew he was there, but I had always thought maybe he told Mark Pellegrino no and
Right.
was just kind of standing there like,
Guilty
watching
by
it happen.
association. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when he reveals like, and then I shot him in the face or something
Mhm.
like that. And then he's like, I didn't even know I did it until after I did it or something like that. He seemed like so shocked that he had done it or whatever. And then hearing like his sister didn't really care about him, stuff like that. Like I think that was that, right?
Mhm.
And and then with everything with Capote not really caring about him. Yeah, you do really feel bad for that guy. And I think that really is an aid to the movie, that it humanizes people because it is one of those things where people do, like, we live in like a culture that's kind of a throwaway. If someone committed a crime, a lot of people are like, just throw them away forever, lock the door, don't care about them, they killed someone. How are you going to defend that? It's like no one's defending that. But just because someone killed someone doesn't mean that you should just murder them just just whatever.
It's not a black and
Because
white thing.
they're still human beings at the end of the day. They deserve a fair trial. They deserve to be probably in jail for the rest of their lives. I'm not going to say that they
Yeah.
should just be let go, but it's one of those things to where maybe you can rehabilitate someone, because a life is precious. A life is special. It's something that, it just doesn't, I mean, I guess people are born every day, but this doesn't always come every day where you get that particular person. And once they're gone, they're gone. And so that's the fragility of life. And I don't know. I don't take it lightly. So it's
Mhm.
one of those things. I think that's why this is. I love that Dylan brought up the Green Mile, because we loved on that movie so much, because it does the same thing where even the people that are guilty, you can still see the humanity in them and stuff. And I think that's
Mhm.
what film can do for people, is to say that these people are people too, even though they did something terrible.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted to touch on that. I went longer than I thought I was going
No,
to.
it's good. It's good. Yeah, and like I said earlier, like the fact that it is so unknown, at least if you've never read the book for so long, like did he actually do it or not? I think adds to the tension there, because like if you are of the mind where yeah, I think he did it, but like it's still unclear. Okay, but they're still sitting together. Like if he did do it, then like this Capote character's in danger. But then at the end, you realize the other guy was more in danger in that moment than Capote was, because Capote is the one who's going to ultimately be telling the story and basically what do you call it, manipulating, but also what's the word I'm looking for, abusing the
Misogyny.
friendship, like and
Mm,
kind of utilizing it for his own gain.
yeah.
So yeah, it's very interesting, just the power dynamics at play is so fascinating. um
And
yeah.
the last thing I wanted to touch on was just the same thing that you said, Dylan. I think is a great point about this movie, is that it does make a really good companion piece with the book, and it's almost like you do want to engage with it more. And I don't know if that's like a detriment to the movie, like you can't really like it unless you know the book or something, or maybe it's this movie's so good that it makes you want to read the book
Yeah.
because it makes you interested in other
Yeah,
things.
I definitely think it's a bit of both. Where it's like if you know the book, I think it's going to be a little bit richer of an experience. But it's not a biopic. Like every biopic should be able to be seen by anyone who doesn't know the artist. I think the best biopics are those that aren't. I mean, like I don't want to date this podcast, but there's the movie in theaters right now that a lot of Americans are saying, "Well, I don't give a shit who Robbie Williams is. He's a UK artist, so I'm not going to go see it." I'm like, no, that's why you should go see it, because you don't know who this person is, so you can
Right.
learn. Because you don't need to know who Bob Dylan is, because you know who Bob Dylan is. Even though I'm also very excited to see that. So it's just one of those things where it's like, just because you know or don't know the subject, it can definitely improve an experience, or could be a detriment if you know about a person and they portray it badly. But you don't have to know the subject matter to understand or appreciate a good biopic. And I think that's what the lesson learned here is: you can enjoy it no matter what, but it could also be enhanced if you know all the ins and outs. But I know a lot of the ins and a lot of the outs here. The big in was Philip Seymour Hoffman winning his first and only Oscar, Best Actor. Capote went 1 for 5. That was the big one and one. But it was also nominated for picture. It was nominated for director for Bennett Miller. and it was nominated for supporting actress for Catherine Keener and adapted screenplay. So, you could say that despite it being a very well-earned Best Actor win, it crushed Stacy's dreams. It crashed her expectations, if you will. I don't know. There's only one segue. I'll let Jack give us the last segue here before we talk about it.
And the Oscar goes to Crash.
I just love after that the pointing up and the whoa.
You can't argue with that applause that happens after it. Like, Jesus.
Yeah, I don't know if it's more applause of like yes or like what the heck, I don't know.
Maybe.
Either way, I mean, Jack's face says it all. The whoa, I love it. Anyway, Chad, tell us about Crash.
Yeah, I didn't know if you were gonna do the monologue at the start of Crash for your segue.
No.
Sometimes we have to crash into each other. But yeah, Crash, directed by Paul Haggis, written by Paul Haggis and Robert Moresco. Cinematography by J. Michael Murrow. Music by Mark Isham. Starring Don Cheadle, or a lot of people. Don Cheadle, Sandra Bullock, Matt Dillon, Jennifer, is it
Esposito.
Esposito or Esposito? We don't know. Brendan Fraser, Terrence Howard, Ludacris, Thandi or Tandy Newton, Michael Pena, Brian Philippi, Keith David, and Tony Danza. There's a lot more, but those are the ones I highlighted. A synopsis. Tensions build in Los Angeles as different people explore their relationships with race.
Yes. So we kind of tiptoed around it a little bit for Brokeback Mountain, only because I feel like so much of the discussion, especially for the year of upsets, is going to be talking about it in tandem with Brokeback Mountain. Why this one won, why that one lost.
Yeah.
But let's just talk about this film on its own first. We come from very different perspectives. I always knew that this was an undeserving winner by the norm. So when I watched it, I had that mindset. I feel like Stacy, you watched it at a time where it wasn't a problem, and then it became like this kind of hated Best Picture winner over time. And Chad, I don't necessarily know exactly where you fall on it, but I know you're also a big $1 Million Baby fan. So I think we're all different, like levels of expertise or different perspectives when it comes to Crash. But I figured, Stacey, you are our guest, and you are the one who was there to witness it all firsthand with that mindset, having kind of lived through it. As you said, it was not a surprise to you when it won Best Picture, even though the precursors had suggested otherwise. But I would love to hear, Stacey, what your thoughts are just about Crash before we get into the actual talk of the award and everything. But what do you think of Crash?
Okay, well, first of all, I have to talk about my theater experience, especially in contrast to the experience of Brokeback Mountain in theaters.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a very crowded theater, I believe pretty packed theater.
Mm-hmm.
As the tension built in this movie, it was one of the most insane feelings I've ever had in a theater, as far as just feeling tension in the air, and you could hear a pin drop. There was
Wow.
People were holding their breath practically. It was an incredible theater going experience, as far as just feeling like part of something and experiencing something like that, which made you leave the theater feeling like this was the best movie ever. Because, when you have that sort of experience in a theater, it definitely impacts your perception of the movie, especially without going into and analyzing it after and all this other stuff, just like the emotional impact it had. I have to say, because I do know the criticisms, and I don't disagree with the criticisms, but at the time, I think, for me, maybe not all over the country, obviously, because it's a big, broad differences in how people are raised and what they know and what they experience. For me, this movie was jarring. I didn't realize there was levels of racism like this still out there. I'm in a bubble. I'm in a suburb, in a bubble, America's hometown. I didn't see these things. I didn't come from a super interracial area, but also never really heard a lot of racism in school or from my family or anywhere. So seeing some of the things in this movie, especially the sexual abuse of Thandi Newton and God, Sandra Bullock's character, just like in Ludacris, seeing that side of things, like those were things we weren't thinking about at the time. It's not like now. We didn't have Facebook where we knew other people that were telling us about these experiences.
Right.
It was new to us, or at least in my experience. Like I said, I'm sure there are plenty of parts of the country where they knew full well and it wasn't new to them, but it had a very big impact at the time for people like me in their bubbles. And really, it gave me a lot to think about. And yes, there's broad stereotypes. That's not great. Everybody in the movie is racist, but that's to illustrate the point.
Right.
Like, they're supposed to, like, that's the point of the movie. Like, even Ryan Phillippe's character, who's been the good guy, the least racist person, in the end gets scared and does what you could consider, maybe he would have had the same reaction if he was white. We don't know, but it seems very racist in the moment of the movie, of course. And I just think, like, the performances are so good. I believe America's Sweetheart is the biggest fucking smackable racist in the world that I just wanna, like, push her down the stairs again because she is awful, but that's just because it's such a good performance. And, like, Tandy Newton, or Thandie, however you say it, in the car when, the sexual abuser, my God, I'm blanking on his name, but I know
Matt
it.
Dillon.
Thank you. I knew there was a Dylan in
Yep.
it, but I was like, it's not Dylan something. When he's the one to have to get her out and she is screaming, "No, don't touch me," because she's been so traumatized by him, but her car's about to blow up. Like, that moment was very powerful in the theater. The end with Michael Pena and his daughter, I was like bawling in tension. Like, it was so tense. Like, this movie built up in such a way that, like, I just couldn't handle it at that point when she jumps out in front of him. And if you know me, I'm not like a super, like, emotional person all the time. Like,
Right.
I cry at happy things. Like, tugging at my heartstrings is quite a feat sometimes. Um, and yeah, some people have called this movie emotionally manipulative, but all movies are emotionally manipulative. That's what they're there to do, is to make you feel stuff. Like, how else do you do that but by being emotionally manipulative? So I don't love the movie. I get the criticisms. I don't hate the movie. I think it had momentum. I don't remember when it came out, if it came out closer to Oscar time, but I did feel like going into it, like I said before, it wasn't a shock. I felt like it had, maybe it was buzzy. I mean, I did read a lot of like Entertainment Weekly and those sorts of things back then.
Mhm.
So maybe there was like a buzziness to it leading up, even though it hadn't won a lot of precursors. But I believe that, like, I wasn't I was mad that it beat Brokeback, but I wasn't mad that it won Best Picture on its own. For a
Okay.
long time after, I kind of hated it because,
Yeah.
again, I get bitter. But
Right. Yeah, and I think you make great points. Like, looking at it now, 2005. I didn't realize this is the 20th anniversary of these movies.
Mhm.
You're looking at these 20 years later. It's totally different than at the time, and I think that's just why movies are so interesting. It's why I've always said it'd be really cool if the Oscars did movies from 5 years ago to at least
Mhm.
give a little bit of time and see, like, are these movies like, I'm thinking what was 5 years ago this year, like the 2020 Oscars. So it's a little harder to say too, but it's like,
Mhm.
are people talking about Mank? Like things
Right?
like the trial of the Chicago 7, is that in the conversation? Like, stuff like that, where I really think it would be interesting to see what would happen if you were to give it a little time. But yeah, of the time, I think I love hearing your experience, because I do think that is kind of very clear, at least when you watch a movie now, even though some things are very disagreeable. I think it is meant to hit you a certain way. You can definitely tell when they're making those big emotional swings, when they're trying to
Mhm.
blow your minds and be like, oh my God, she pulled out the blanks, there weren't actually bullets in the
Yeah.
gun, which is supposed to be that like big moment where you're like, OMG. Like it is very, it's very broadly stroked,
And
struck. I don't know the word for it. Like, they're big, broad strokes, and you can
yes.
definitely see where it does feel Oscar baity in that sense. But as you said, a lot of movies are emotionally manipulative, like that, or at least, their purpose is to elicit an emotion. And
Mhm.
necessarily how you go about it might be a little bit more obvious than others. But yeah, like, all movies are empathy machines, as Roger Ebert once said. Roger Ebert also gave this the 2 thumbs up. It's on the poster, 2 thumbs way up, and it was his number 1 film of that year. So I mean, like,
Wow.
there are esteemed critics
I
who
own it.
time.
Like, I
Yeah.
didn't hate it. I own
Listen,
it.
I own it too. It's part of a box set, but yeah, like I think there is something to be said about like understanding the time then and the time now, but also when we get into the talk about Brokeback versus Crash, the idea that like, you know, the idea that people say this won because the Academy wanted to pat themselves on the back and say, we are against racism. Yay, we did it. We acknowledged a movie that's about bad racism, but it's also like, there's also a movie that is about combating homophobia, which I think is a lot more of a relevant thing. Like we had Spike Lee for years and years and years talking about the racism thing. We haven't had a gay Western before. Like that's something that's revolutionary. And I think that's the thing is, like you said, when you put it in comparison, it's like you're not necessarily mad that it won. It's more so that it beat Brokeback Mountain, which is essentially serving a similar function to try to break down a taboo and something that society is uncomfortable with. It's just, I guess the Academy was more ready to acknowledge racism than they were homophobia.
I think it was almost like, we can't give it to the gay cowboy, so we'll give it to the racists.
Right, because if we give it to Capote,
like,
if we give it to Munich, if we give it to Good Night and Good Luck, we look awful because we're homophobic.
And
but if we give it to the race movie, then they'll at least think we're about that issue and not about Brokeback. Yeah,
right. We're, as they say these days, at the time, if we had used this term, people would have thought this movie was woke. Like, you know, we didn't have that term, but like in that way, obviously we had the word woke, but yeah. So it was a little of that feeling of, well, we're not going to give it to the gay cowboys, so we'll give it to this other very socially conscious.
Right, to still make us seem like we're accepting, even though we're homophobic still. Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. Just want to also make a clarification. It came out in May, so it came out in the middle of the year. So the fact that it had the staying power through the year, but it came out at TIFF the year before, so it was running the festivals in 2004, so at least had that like prestige hype. So it wasn't just completely out of the blue, but it is one of those movies that kind of like comes out, kind of forget about it, gets a few nominations, didn't even get a Globe nomination, then somehow sneaks up, wins SAG, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, these actors, this cast, and then boom, wins Best Picture. But we'll talk about that in a sec. Chad, I want to hear your thoughts for Crash, because as long as I've known you, I've known that you have at least not been the biggest fan of Crash. So I just would love to hear maybe your perspective change. Maybe it's the same. Maybe you're doubling down. Maybe it's even harder against or for. But I'd love to know, Chad, what are your thoughts on Crash now? This is, I think, one of the only movies next to Brokeback that we all had seen. So I'm very curious, Chad, what you thought of Crash.
Well, right off the bat, I'll just say, yeah, I'm not a fan.
Okay.
My feelings for this has evolved nowhere near to the level of Stacy, because I wasn't at a higher level of brain function that Stacy was at the time that this movie came out. You were an adult, so you can actually think about race and, you know, think about all this stuff. I don't even think I saw it when it came out either. So if I had, I don't even know if I would have understood really much of this. I mean, I was 15, so it's not like I'm like, you know, a dummy or anything, but like these movies weren't the movies I was gravitating towards when I was 15 years old. But it, you know, so when I first watched it, I can't remember when it was, but it's more towards Dylan's thing, where it's like, I know this isn't a well-liked movie, but unlike Dylan's, I can't, you haven't even really said how you actually feel about the movie. But I'm pretty sure
maybe it's my number one.
I'm pretty sure I know how you feel about the movie. But you know, from what I've heard, you know, you've been smiling a lot, and so have I. And it's because, well, I will say, you know, when I first watched it, it was on a level of, this can't be that bad. And
almost like I like to see the bright side, almost. I like to approach movies that are from, you know, like they're so like like when I watched Shakespeare in Love for the first time, like I wanted to like it because so many people are against it. That's kind of the same thing for Crash, as I'm like, and I did, yeah, of course, for Crash, and I was like, you know, so many people hate this movie. I'm gonna see if I can like this movie. And I think I kind of did when I first watched it. But I think I've also had like a very change of mind about like race and how I think about race. And I think like
my mind a lot of the time, and how I have perceived race in the past and now kind of mirrors a lot of what America has gone through, and an ever evolving, like, change of how we feel about race. And I think around this time that this came out was one of people could think that this movie is profound. And it has so much to say, and it says a lot very well. And then as time has gone on, and how, younger people, like, Gen Z and stuff, who are very, like, no nonsense about race, like, it's just like shut it down, where I
Yeah.
feel like with, like, the Gen X and millennials are more like, where they're like, I'm trying to think, because there's a very middle ground. There are people who are racist, and then there are people who are like, I'm not racist, but, and then they're the ones that'll shut it down, and they go, no, that's not right. Shut up. You're not, don't even say that.
Hmm.
But the more middle ground of I'm not racist, but, I think that's where this movie lives. Because I think it's very tone deaf. It wants so badly to be profound that it brings up race every chance that it gets, but none of the characters are likable except Michael Pena, who is my favorite part of the movie. I love his character. I love his relationship with
so
his
good.
daughter. I love the whole thing about him saying, I have this thing that you wear, this,
Cape.
cape that you wear, and it will protect you. I like how it plays into the movie later, even though, Stacy found that in the theater very emotionally impactful. I found it very funny because it's
God.
like one of those things where it just feels so like, oh, of course. And like, kind of everything slows. Everyone's like, oh no. And it's just like, it just goes so over the top that it's just ridiculous to me. So, but I could see, like, in the theater, it's also like, this is like the third time that I've seen Crash. So I've gone from kind of liking it to, how did I like this, to, this is so freaking ridiculous. This movie, everybody's racist. And I was like, I don't think it paints an accurate picture of America. Like, I think, there are a lot of racist people. I don't think everyone's racist to the degree, no, and everyone's very blunt about their racism in this movie. And I'm like, no one's really that blunt. Some people are,
Yeah,
but
when
not
Matt
most.
Dillon's on the phone and she says her name is like Shaniqua, and he's like,
Of
"Well,
course it
that
is.
explains it."
Yeah,
Like,
you're right.
keep going.
And then I
Oh
think
my God,
Matt
the amount of times
Dillon.
he says "you people," I'm like, I want to
I
punch you in the
think
face
Matt.
for every "you
I
people."
think yeah, I think Matt Dillon is maybe one of those most accurate depictions of a racist in this movie, because, like, he's very, like, he'll be nice to someone who's not white for a second, until he doesn't get what he wants, and then he's gonna come out with it like, oh, you people are all this, or something like
Mhm.
that. And then it's like, there it is. Of course he's gonna say that, because he's deep down, he's been taught this. And stuff like that. But and then they go to the whole thing where he's got to save her from the car, and then this is a profound moment that changes his mind and changes his racism and fixes him, and he's no
Oh,
longer racist. And it's just like,
I didn't think that.
that's what I'm saying. This movie is just so
But
tone
yeah,
deaf. It thinks it can fix racism, and it's just, I don't know. I just think it's a pretty bad movie. I
It's
don't think it's anywhere close to being a best picture level movie. And even the moments I like, I'm just like, it's fine. It's not like, anything next level or anything like that.
Yeah, I'll chime in a sec, but Stacey, I just
You're
want to hear
fine.
what you had to say about
well,
the
I
car.
never thought that anybody. The only person I thought maybe was somewhat changed by their experiences was Sandra Bullock,
Hmm.
with her admitting that the maid was her best friend, and her realizing that all of these white, rich friends she had couldn't be bothered to help her out. It was, the maid that helped her out. I think she might have had a little bit, and it probably wouldn't have lasted, but I think in the moment she might have had a little bit of a eye-opening experience. I didn't think that he was no longer racist because he pulled her out of the car. I thought he was doing his job. And I didn't think that made everything okay for her either. I think they were just in that moment two people. And that's what it was showing. Like, despite all of these things going on, like at the end of the day, when it comes right down to it, they're just two people. And he's not going to let her die, and she's not going to die by suicide by car because of the fact of who he is. And there was one other thing I wanted to say about it. Oh, and I also just wanted to say, I don't think it should have won Best Picture. Like, I don't think I said I wasn't mad that it won Best Picture. I was bad that it beat Brokeback Mountain. That is at the time. Like,
Right.
I totally get and understand and agree with a lot of the criticisms of why it should never have been a Best Picture winner now. So I just want to clarify that so
Yeah,
people
no, you
don't think that I'm like,
Well,
no,
and
this
and
is
that's the thing.
definitely a Best Picture.
There are still people who do love it, and I think
Yeah.
it's because they remember it from that time. They
Mhm.
have the nostalgia. Nostalgia is a weird thing to say about like
Yeah.
Crash. It's not like the Forrest Gump thing
And
where
it
if you have
impacts.
nostalgia for Forrest Gump, you might like it more. It's a
Impact
little different.
movie.
Yeah, like I definitely think though, like your experience can definitely change things. I mean, there is a Best Picture winner. We haven't covered it yet, so I don't want to say what it is, but it's one that is very hated. That when I left the theater, I said that is the best movie of the year, and it very quickly changed within a week because I was like, no, I still like this better. I still like this better. But there was a movie that I was like, this is like the best movie of the year. Like I get why it's gonna win, and then when it won. I was a little upset because I just didn't think it would happen and it wasn't my favorite of the slate. But I was like, you know what? Like I understand. Like, because there is sometimes that feeling of just like when you're just it might strike you at the right time of day to like feel like you need it, especially at the time. Maybe there were people who actually genuinely needed this movie to show that they were racist. But I think the thing is also it's like, that's a very select few people. Like I feel like a lot of racists won't even watch this movie because it has black actors in it because they're saying, oh yeah, I'm turning this off after a few minutes. I think the people that are going to stick with it are people who already kind of know better, at least now. And that's a good thing. You said, Stacey, you were in your own little suburban bubble. Maybe at the time there were people who actually learned a lot from this movie. But I think nowadays, if you were to show people, I think, like you said, we have so many other sources that I think you could learn a lot more from that it speaks to it in a much more interesting and authentic experience. I mean, I said it earlier, like Spike Lee had been doing it for years already, showing these really authentic black experience films that combat racism, but also give humanity to black characters. And I think that's one of the things that this film does falter in. It deals a lot with racism and especially black versus white. And it doesn't really celebrate I'm not saying a movie like this has to celebrate the joy of blackness, but it also makes the black characters feel like they're merely existing to sell the point, and it doesn't feel like they have their own, you know, individual stories and arcs. And even though we see a married couple with Terrence Howard and Tandaway Newton, who, by the way, that's pronunciation Tandy, who's now Tandaway Newton, but like seeing their marriage, like, yeah, they're married, but they have so much bitterness toward each other. It's like you can't find actual genuine love. And that's why I think Michael Pena's character does ring true to so many people, because he's one of the only people who his bond with the daughter is that one thing that does feel so beautiful in the midst of all this really like spiteful shit where like even the black characters in this film are made to like they're either racist toward other black people, which a lot of critics were saying at the time, like black people can still be racist, which is something that has been debunked since. But it's also like one of those things where like even in their own individual arcs, it always feels like it's relating to the racism, and they don't feel like actual genuine characters with actual lives and personalities. And that's why I think Michael Pena's character is so relatable in that way. But yeah, I'd love you to speak on that, Stacey. Because again, that's my perspective coming from the 2025 Dylan brain. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I just think what often gets overlooked, or I should say who often gets overlooked as feeling like maybe a full-fledged character and who isn't really racist, I don't ever see him really be racist, is Don Cheadle's younger brother, Ludacris's friend. He listens to
I like
Ludacris
him.
and tries to counteract everything he says. He likes Western music and hockey and is just, got his Saint Christopher, and he's not afraid of Ryan Phillip because he's white, and he doesn't, see everything as racism towards him like Ludacris does. And I think he's a very good picture of that other side of being
Yeah.
non-racist. Do you know what I mean?
But he's also the one who gets brutally
Yeah,
murdered too. So
well,
and that's the
right.
thing. I think that's the point I was trying to make also is like even the characters like that aren't necessarily completely married to the racist storylines that aren't just merely pieces of the plot. They all still feel very shortchanged. It's like the characters that grow are the white
Well,
characters, and I think that's something
right.
that we said. Yeah,
And that's partly due to the large ensemble, I think, of the cast and it not being an overly long movie because it's
right.
not. It's actually a very well paced movie. It kind of goes by very quickly. Maybe not if you're hating it, but
Mhm.
if you're like okay with it while you're watching it, it goes by. It is very well paced. But yeah, I mean, the characters are very one-dimensional. It's definitely a fair criticism of the movie in general. Um, but I did want to point out his character
No,
and him
yeah,
being kind of
yeah.
not with what you were saying about everybody.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. And even the black characters, like some of them do still have arcs. Like I think Don Cheadle's character goes on an arc, but it is
Oh
one of
yeah,
those things where it's still an arc that ends with him being like miserable and sad. There's no hope in this thing, and I think that's another
mhm,
thing that goes with Capote and Brokeback. Like it's a very dour slate of movies. It's
Yeah.
one of those that I don't think is necessarily feel good, and I
no,
think
it's not a feel-good movie at all.
right, and that's the thing is, like, even though it's being emotional and very sentimental, like, I think the moment with the car that we've been talking about is supposed to be made as this big, like, triumphant, like, feel good, like,
Oh, and the smoke.
moment, but it just it doesn't because there's that ickiness of it. He's like he was groping her, and, like, I get, like, people can change, but it also feels very circumstantial. My biggest issue with that scene, and this is the frame wreck side of my brain, is how in LA, the biggest freaking city in the world, does this cop that happened to grope her happen to also be the one who has to
Right,
save her from the car.
right.
It's like one of those things where it's like, oh, what is the convenience that this person ended up running into this person, ended up running into and she's the nurse at the hospital. What a coinky dink. Like, and it's
Mhm.
not like Love Actually, where like the whole like mind blow of the end is like, oh, they're all connected. They're all at the airport together. And it's more so like it feels forced that they're trying to like
Well, they're
marry
the
all these
ways they
little
crash into each other. That
right.
everyone's crashing into each other all the
Right,
time.
but it's not Love Actually. There's not harmony. It is quite
Right,
literally a crash. It doesn't
right.
work. Crash is meant to be a very negative thing. It crashes into one
Mhm,
another. It quite literally explodes when you put it all together. And I think that's what this movie is. I think honestly, my biggest criticisms aren't necessarily the racial ones. And yes, those are big criticisms because obviously it's dated. But I do think at the time this seems like it does capture at least the thinking of society at the time. At least the more like kind of secluded, as you said, kind of more the white suburban kind of mindset of the time, not necessarily Hollywood's sensibility, because I think there were
mhm,
great artists, like I said, Spike Lee, who had been doing it for so long. My biggest issue is kind of what you just said, which is everything's just too crammed and rushed. Like I don't feel like I know any character well at all
mhm.
because everything's just
Yeah.
happening a mile a minute. Everything's cluster fucking everywhere, and then it's just there's no through line, and the through line is just racism, which I just don't think nowadays is enough. And I just think it's just so much, you know, as you literally said, crashing and so many just different plot threads crashing into one another. I think if they were to eliminate maybe half the characters and focus on like 3 concrete storylines,
Yeah,
maybe it's a little bit more effective. But because everything feels
Mm.
rushed, it doesn't feel like any of these people are characters. They're just merely people to like have as placeholders in a story because we need to touch on this message, we need to touch on this message, we need to touch on this message, not we need to explore this character or explore that character. And I don't think it's well shot. We kind of talked about it. Chad was laughing at the slow mo. Like I think some of it has like those bad 2000s tendencies. I think it's terribly lit. I think, you know, to have and we haven't even talked about it, but you have a white filmmaker making a movie about black people, you know, you should kind of talk with the DP and the cinematographer and figure out how to light black people correctly in nighttime
Mm.
sequences, like stuff like that, where it's like there's just like little things that you don't really think about, but then you start to look at all of it, like the way it's edited, the way it's shot, the way it's written. That's the
mhm,
kind of stuff that I don't love because, like, I get it, it's a product of its time, but for me, it's just it's formally bad. Like the
yeah,
formality, the structure, I think is sloppy, and I think that's the thing. If this was a film that had a really interesting thing to say about racism, it would be better. But like if it was still shot like this and edited like this, I still wouldn't like it. And I think
yeah,
that's a double. It like doubles down on it being an undeserving Best Picture winner because it's not only tone deaf, but it is also I just think poorly crafted. And I
and
think that's something to say as well. Sorry, go ahead.
I
I was
well,
on
and
my
that's
high
where I
horse, my
think
soapbox. I'm done.
the impact of the theater experience, like I said, you walk out not analyzing everything, you walk out just feeling and having that tension with everybody else. And so, and you know, it's easy to do like you said with the other movie, be like, this is the best movie of the year, and then later be like, well, maybe not. But at that time when you first walk out, it does feel great. You're not thinking about all those criticisms. At least, I mean, I certainly wasn't. And I've been a movie person since a very young
Oh, yeah.
age. And I was early in high school, 15. I was watching movies like this. Like I was watching Best Picture nominated movies. I watched The Piano and like, I don't know, early 90s. I was a teenager or a pre-teenager maybe.
Yeah.
But so while I was aware, same year I'm talking about cinematography for Brokeback Mountain, the emotions of it, the tension of it was so overwhelming that that's where the focus was post movie.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I think just getting to rewatch something over and over, you start to pick up on the other layers, like you did with Brokeback Mountain. You're looking at the shirts and how they, that's not something when you watch it the first time you would ever pick up on. It's like, oh, the fact that this shirt is on top of this shirt is on top of this shirt. But when you watch it a million times, that's what you get. And I think this is only my second watch, but I was able to be like, what is that shot? What is that camera movement? Like stuff like that. Why the close-ups? Like everything was frustrating me almost to where it seemed like an SNL sketch when she falls down the stairs to where I'm laughing and I'm like, I shouldn't be laughing at her falling down the stairs, but it's done in a way that feels funny and in the same as the Michael Pena moment. Like I'm cracking up at that moment because it's so ridiculously filmed and edited and I shouldn't be, and some people it might not, but that's just my personal experience. I don't know. Chad.
I mean, I think if the little girl had actually died, then that would have been even heavier. But because also she doesn't, it's it just I don't know. I don't even know what they were really doing with it. I also think they're just make every character not every character because it's another thing I want to touch on, but it makes every character kind of just almost hateable and just some of the worst people. But I think Dylan hit on a lot of really great stuff about the filmmaking and why this shouldn't have been well received because of that. But then also Stacy reminded me about some characters that I really actually did find interesting, like Ludacris and his friend. I actually found both of them kind of interesting, because they do have some stuff that you touch on and you go, it's interesting. It's just not that well executed. Like the whole thing of Ludacris just literally killing an Asian man, and then
Well, he doesn't kill him.
Well,
He's
you're
alive.
right. You're right.
But
then he
doesn't
frees all
actually
the other
kill him, but
Chinamen. I'm saying Chinaman
but
because
he
they call him Chinaman.
Yeah, in the context of the movie, it's Chinaman, but that is a very dated.
Yes,
term.
no,
Yeah.
that's not
I got
something
you.
I would use in everyday speech.
We get you.
But yeah, you're right. He doesn't. That's a part that I actually found really sweet is when that man finds his wife, or the wife finds him in the hospital, and they touch on and stuff. And there are little sweet moments and stuff. And I mean, Ludacris doesn't do anything for that guy, but then he does, see all the people in the car and lets them go free instead of, harming anyone else. But even Ludacris is not a likable character. But I like how you touched on that his friend is though, and he doesn't do anything bad to anyone. And in fact, he's the one that gets killed at the end, and how Ryan Phillippe's character is kind of complex because he actually helps Terrence Howard's character, which was a very tense scene. So there are some scenes in this that are very tense, that are very,
even partner with Matt Dillon because Matt Dillon's so racist.
Yeah.
Ryan Phillippe is no, I can't be with him. He's so uncomfortable with that situation that he tells everybody he has a farting problem to get out of it. So he's really
I think that's kind of stupid though.
It is stupid.
Yeah.
It's very stupid, but it's also on a character perspective embarrassing for that to be how he gets out of the situation. I mean, it is stupid.
But I do like how you No, that's okay. But I do like how you touched on the Ryan Phillippe's whole kind of arc where, he finds out that he has implicit bias and stuff. And I think a better written movie could actually say a lot about implicit bias and stuff like that. Because that's something that we are experiencing today,
right,
with cops having implicit bias, and that's something that we should be aware about. We should teach about because that's still here in 2025. And so that's something that that is relevant for today. And that was a really good point because I forgot about that part. And it is a very one where as soon as he's about to reach into his pocket that Ryan Phillippe is going to make a mistake.
Right.
And stuff. So there are interesting stuff in this movie. It's not the worst movie ever made, but because it does go so hard into the tone deaf, it just doesn't even feel like the movie understands racism.
Not
And that's
anymore. No.
why it's trying exactly. And it's evolved.
The lens of today. Yeah. No.
Yeah. So it doesn't feel like it's ahead of its time. It feels like it's stuck in the past. And that's why it's not a great representation of cinema going forward, which I think a Best Picture should be. I mean, it can be, you can have like a Best Picture winner be set in the past and be kind of, like a time capsule of something from the past. Like Oppenheimer is something that, was set in the past, but it also informs a lot about today. And I think, that's where Crash fails.
Where
in
it
it.
crashes.
So I totally understand where, I totally understand where Stacy's coming from and how she felt at a certain point. There's so many movies that I felt a certain way about in the past, like Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. Back then, hilarious, loved it. Today, I can go, it's very funny still, but there's some problematic stuff in that movie. So I totally get it on that.
Yeah. Well, and now I just want to quickly cap it off with the Oscar win itself, because I think another thing that we talk about all the time on the show is that winning Best Picture could be the biggest curse for this film. If it doesn't win Best Picture, I think a lot of people are like, how'd that win? But whatever. But I think when you win an award for the best movie of the year, there is an expectation. And I think that's also why Shakespeare in Love gets flack, because it's a very good film. But are people really saying this is the best film of the year? Some are, but I just don't think it's overwhelming in the way that Lord of the Rings: Return of the King is the best film of that year. It's the grandest. It's the best made. There are films like that where it's just undeniable in a way, or it's at least justifiable. But I think a lot of films, if it's not everyone's number one, even if it's your number two, even if this is the best movie behind Brokeback, if it beats Brokeback, now all of a sudden it's the biggest villain. And I think that's something that's really interesting about Oscar wins in general, is that I really do think if we were to watch these movies and not known who won, this would not be my number 5. I'll just tell you right now. This would not be my number 5. I'm going to tip my ranking right now, or at least my number 5. This would not be my number 5. It's my number 5 because I think it has that extra pressure of it being, okay, now that I know that the Academy deemed this the best film of the year, now I have a problem. And I think that's kind of what it is. I think it really is one of those things that is painted by context. And we see it with even good movies. I mean, we both awarded Coda our best picture. We both awarded Nomadland our best picture between the two of us. Those are two movies that people don't like because it won. And I think that's something that, or I'm saying everyone, but you know what I mean? The general perception of, a lot of the film going community. But then you have the movies that are undeniable. Everything Everywhere All at Once, Oppenheimer. It really depends on the movie and the time and the other competition, because it is really fascinating to see when a movie wins how that immediately turns things on a dime. I remember people building up to the 2014 Oscars. I can say this because we already covered this episode. Were so obsessed with Birdman. It's one of the coolest things ever. What they're doing with the cinematography is fantastic. It's fantastic. And then it wins. Everyone's like, fuck that. And I'm like, what? And I think that's just what it is. I think that's just what Best Picture does to someone. It is the biggest curse. And I honestly think if Brokeback Mountain had won, I think I wouldn't personally push back on it, but I think there would also be some people who are saying that was undeserving. I just think any film that wins is going to have backlash. And I think that is the biggest downfall of this, is that if it doesn't win, we probably don't even think about Crash today. I think the fact that it won makes it something that has to be talked about, especially in tandem with Brokeback, which is doing a very similar thing for a different issue, obviously, but kind of breaking down the taboos, but doing so from a more honest perspective. And that's, as far as I know, Ang Lee's not gay, I don't think. The writer might be. I don't know if Ang Lee wrote it. I forget. But I think that film is more successful about talking about the gay experience than this film is talking about the Black experience, because Paul Haggis, he's a white dude, and that's why I'm not nervous about $1 Million Baby, because I know that's a much more authentic story to tell than this one, So I don't know. I think that's the biggest thing, is the pedestal that a Best Picture puts you on immediately then detracts even more eyes, and that's why it's tough to win sometimes, and sometimes the biggest blessing is losing.
Yeah,
honestly.
I 100% agree with that. And it made me not like the movie because it beat Brokeback Mountain, and I had that great experience with it. But I was
Right.
like, fuck this. Like,
Yeah,
sorry.
and when I said no, we can curse. It's fine. But when I said I put it at 5 in my ranking, it's because there's another film that I think I'm not going to think about as much as this. Like I still think
Mhm,
Crash has scenes and characters and performances that I'll at least think about. But I think just in the grand scheme of things, this is probably the most detrimental Oscar win because of what it is
mhm,
standing for. But it's still not my least favorite Best Picture winner ever either. You know, there's just movies that I like Out of Africa that we covered. I was just bored to hell with. You know,
mhm,
Gigi I think is much more problematic than this even is. You know, so there's other movies that I think are just worse. So you know, I think it's one of those caveats where it's like it's not the worst movie ever to win Best Picture. It's not even the worst, the worst of the
yeah,
slate maybe, but like because it won it's just much worse than it would have been otherwise. I don't know.
mhm.
Sorry, that's my soapbox again.
That's
I
okay.
just had a lot to say. We all had a lot to say. Any last thoughts on Crash, Chad?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I adore "In the Deep," the song. I love
Oh,
that song.
cool.
So, if
There you
one
go.
great thing came out of it, it's that
Yeah.
song.
And that's the one that didn't win. But it lost to what's the song from Hustle and Flow? Um
Ooh, oh, Hard
uh
Out.
it's hard out here for a pimp. Yep.
For
So
Pimp.
it
Yeah,
lost to that. So
that was
you know,
close.
not a bad loss. Not a bad loss. A very deserving winner there. Second rap song I think to win after
Yeah,
Lose Yourself.
Lose Yourself
And
was the first to ever win the
yep,
Academy Award.
second and only. I think. I don't think we've seen one since. I think the song from Judas and the Black Messiah was more R&B, but had a little bit of rap influence, and
Mhm,
Glory from Selma had a little rap influence in some parts. But yeah, mostly, yeah, that is the second and only rap song to win. But Crash won 3 big awards on Oscar night out of 6. It won Best Picture, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Editing. Which we always say you can't win picture unless you win screenplay, editing, or director. This won 2 of those 3. So people probably could have seen it coming. Obviously, Stacy was not surprised by it, but still a shocker nonetheless, especially given its competition. Also nominated for director for Paul Haggis, supporting actor for Matt Dillon. He was the one who was singled out, and best original song for In the Deep, as Chad just mentioned. But it was a pretty good night for Crash. But another film didn't have as much luck. Let's talk about Good Night and Good Luck. Chad, take us away.
All right, good night and good luck. Directed by George Clooney, written by George Clooney and Grant Heslov, cinematography by Robert Elswit, starring David Strathairn, Patricia Clarkson, George Clooney, Robert Downey Jr., Frank Langella, Jeff Daniels, Tate Donovan, Ray Wise, Helen Slayton Hughes, and Alex Borstein. Synopsis: a TV news station reports the news on rising anti-communist sentiment during the McCarthy era.
Yeah, there you go. Another, I'll say it again, another very cold film, very straightforward, very bleak. You know, not as necessarily sad as a lot of the other ones. I'm going to start with this one because I feel like I've let you all start with the last 3, and this is honestly the one I have the least amount to say about. So I figured if I go first, maybe you all will fill in the blanks later. Rather than trying to follow you two, I probably won't have anything to say if that's the other way around. But yeah, this is one where I was so excited because you know it's come back to. It's coming to or coming back to. I don't even think it's been on Broadway. But they're doing a Broadway interpretation of this soon. It's a play, and George Clooney is playing the David Strathairn character in that. You know, George Clooney taking the leap to direction. I believe this is either his first or second directorial film. I don't know. Maybe Stacy remembers.
I
Is
think
this
it
his
was his
first?
first, but
Yeah,
I'm not.
it might be, but just the fact that you have someone who's like Mr. Hollywood, you know, he's in all the Ocean's movies. He's a big star. He's on ER, and he like makes a film, and it's very stylish. And I think that's the thing that struck me the most is that this feels not like a first film. It feels very much like someone who's seasoned, who knows how to get the right shots, the right cinematography. I mean, using the time period it's trying to convey to be authentic with the music and the fashion and just the mannerisms, the way people smoke. We were kind of talking about it before we started recording. You know, it wouldn't it be fun if Chad lit a
Mhm,
cigarette or I lit a cigarette for Chad during this, just because like there's like such a interesting vibe that this era gives off, especially people in news and media. I mean, I think about Mad Men a lot when I think
mhm,
about this movie, just kind of that kind of style where it's a little laid back. All the guys are men in suits and they all have a certain demeanor to them, and I think it's just a big flex for George Clooney as a director this early in his career to deliver something that feels so experienced and so veteran in its filmmaking. But because it feels very veteran, it feels very much like someone who's been doing this for a long time has made it. It also feels a little old fashioned to its detriment because it is so cold. Like I said, it almost kind of feels like they kind of stripped all the emotion out of it to tell something very straightforward because they want to give you the stone cold facts. But because they're giving you the stone cold facts, they don't give anything else to kind of support that and give you any emotional feeling. It's kind of similar to how I felt about Capote, but even Capote had those little moments of intrigue and mystery and like, you know, that wishy-washiness, that manipulation of the character. Whereas this one, it just feels like a very accurate, straightforward retelling of facts that, like, for me, is not as engaging as what is going on in presenting those facts stylistically. So that's my thoughts on Good Night and Good Luck. I really don't have much else to add just because it is very straightforward. But I also think, you know, I'm not as well versed in the whole communist, you know, conversations of the time and the McCarthy era and all that stuff. So, you know, I was very interested in it when it was a big part of Oppenheimer, as Chad had talked about with the last film. You know, that's 2 films now that compared to Oppenheimer. Crash, Good Night and Good Luck. You didn't think you'd see that on your bingo card, but no, I definitely think it's an interesting subject matter, but I feel like if I read it in a book, I would have felt the same way as I did seeing it in a movie. But I also acknowledge the presentation is really, really good. Like the black and white looks great. George Clooney did a great job with it. It's just he was doing something with something I just don't find as interesting as some of these others. But I don't know. Who wants to talk next? I feel like you guys will have much more to add, but that was my basic thoughts on a very basic movie. Not to call any movie basic, but you know, it's very basic, straightforward, good movie.
I mean, I think that's kind of like, I think you hit it on the nose. Like, this is not a bad movie in my opinion. I don't know if it's like a great movie either. I mean, it is one that feels like it like wants to do one thing and then just be done, and that's what it is. I mean, it's like a 90-minute movie. It's just like so, you know, it's one thing. It's about like a journalist team. That's why I was like wondering if Dylan was gonna love it, because he normally loves like journalism movies
I do.
and stuff like that. So, but because, like you said, like, even, I mean, the subject matter is interesting. Like you said, even like in Oppenheimer, it's very interesting because it's like, you know, people like interrogating and going like, did you have ties with this person who's a communist? And, you know, me today, I'm like, this like Red Scare communism shit is so fucking stupid that it's just like, what does it matter? Like, you know, like that person wanted the workers to own the means of production. Okay, why is that like such a bad thing? They want workers' lives to be better. Like, I just don't, like, what is your actual like fear? Because it's like spies and stuff. Like, okay, I got it. Like, if it's like someone who's like against the government and all that stuff, you know, that's more intrigue and stuff, you know. But I feel like this one is even less about that, and it's just more so about like the TV studio being so, you know, gutsy to be like, you know, we're gonna actually like bring this story to the like the nation. And, you know, Frank Langella being like, okay, but this could go south or something like that, kind of a deal, but I'm gonna let you do it. And just having the guts to do it, you know. I feel like it's well written, well acted, well everything, and like it kind of feels like The Artist a little bit, where it's like that black and white, like period piece kind of movie that you like when you see it, but like you don't really think about it much after you see it, and then you go like, yeah, it kind of did its job. Maybe there's other better movies that I've seen that have covered that material better, you know, in like different ways and stuff. And yet I didn't hate it, you know, because I feel like if it were a lot longer, I would have disliked it maybe.
Yeah,
But like,
there were 3
because it
hours
was,
of the same old. Yeah, it would have
because it was so tight, I'm like, yeah, that was pretty solid, you know, fine.
Yeah.
Like it told that story that I wanted to tell.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, Stacy, thoughts on Good Night and Good Luck?
So I ended up having to watch it twice this week. Because as you say, it's not the most engaging movie. I did find 2 parts of it very interesting. I found the fact that they weren't censoring the news quite interesting, because I think, you know, now I think it would be censored and you wouldn't be allowed to necessarily go on and be political if it was opposite of the views that the
Yeah.
station wanted to present.
Especially like CBS, which I feel like
Right.
is a more general news than like CNN, you know, which is
Mhm.
like getting down to the facts, you know.
And I found the role that Ed Morrow played in kind of bringing light to the fact that all this McCarthyism is bullshit was very interesting because he had an impact on that, which is shown. I think it would have been better as a documentary. I think a documentary would have been much more engaging and interesting about the subject matter. Because I don't really care about the movie. Like, I'm pretty neutral on it. I don't feel the need to watch it again, but it's not bad.
Yeah, because like documentaries, they present the facts, but like you fictionalize, or not fictionalize, but you make something cinematic in order to kind of get deeper into either the style of the time, which this kind of does, but also like deeper into the characters and kind of trying to figure out why they do these things, not just what they did. But I feel like this movie doesn't necessarily do that. There's a little bit of it, like with Robert Downey Jr. and Patricia Clarkson's characters, like kind of the romance of it, but like really it feels like these characters are kind of unchanged. It's more so the world is changing because of them. And I like how Chad was like kind of talking about I think it was with Frank Langella or someone, where it's like you know, do you want to air this, do you not want to air this, like McCarthyism, all this stuff. The way he was saying it was more urgent than they are saying them in the movie. Like in the movie, it's very much like, I don't know if you want to do that. I don't know. I'm gonna do it. Oh, like everything's very matter of fact, which I think is interesting. It's a very interesting approach. But the reason why other journalism movies hook me, as Chad was saying, is because there's that idea of like, we got to get the story, we got to get it out now. There's an urgency to it. There's like a purpose. There's a drive, and I feel like this film doesn't have the drive. That makes sense.
It gave me a lot of newsroom vibes, but like on like sedatives. It was like newsroom on sedatives vibe is how I kind of took it.
That's a good point.
That's a good point you guys raised, because like, you know, even we'll get to it at some point, but even like, you know, movies like Spotlight, you know, you have like, you know, these scenes with people like, you know, they can't get away with this kind of a thing, and like, you know, you're actually having like people pleading. And yeah, that's a really good point about like, you know, building that intrigue I don't know. I think it's a good point.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say is like, I do think it's interesting that like the bigger villain is the whole McCarthy of it all, but like the fact that Frank Langella is kind of this opposing force inside, it makes it a little bit more intriguing, where there's at least someone within the walls of the studio that's kind of pushing back. But even then, I feel like it's still not as much of an opposing force. Like he's almost kind of like warning David Strathairn, like, if you do this, you know, there's going to be consequences. And he's like, so I do it. That's how I roll. Like he's just kind of laying it out for him. It's very matter of fact, which there's an appreciation to that, but it's also, I think it just lessens the stakes, especially because it's history. We know what happened. We know how this all ended. We know how it continued. It's not like there's this anything looming in the balance that it's like, wow, what's going to happen next? There's not that. Or even in something that is real life, but something even like Oppenheimer, I feel like there's, you understand the stakes of it, and it dives deeper past it too. It shows the fallout of certain things. Whereas this one, it's just that one day in the newsroom or the few days in the newsroom. You know, it's very just straightforward. And like you said, Stacey, it could have probably just been a documentary. The only thing I think you lose if it's a documentary is the style. And I think that's what I want to kind of end the conversation with is, you know, I think George Clooney still does a really good job with how he executes everything. It's just not particularly exciting. I don't know. So, any other thoughts? I mean, this is a brief conversation, but I feel like it's a brief movie. It's a quick one, and I know the next one's like 3 times the length of this one, so maybe it'll require a little bit more conversation, especially with current events. But Good Night and Good Luck doesn't win a single Oscar, but it's nominated for 6. It's nominated for picture, director for George Clooney, actor for David Strathairn, original screenplay, art direction, and cinematography. And George Clooney famously, when he won the award for Syriana the same year, he got up to the podium after winning supporting actor and said, "So I guess I lost director," which I think is a very funny speech, because he's like, they're not going to give me this and director. So he's like, this is the consolation prize, I guess, which a lot of people viewed it as. Is like, okay, you're not going to win director, but we'll give you supporting actor to be like, you had a great year, bud. But yeah, anyway, very cool for him, though, to win supporting actor for a whole different film and then also be up for picture and director and writing. It's very, very cool to be a George Clooney that day. It's really
cool George Clooney. Come on.
Always cool to be George Clooney. And it's always a cool day. Always a cool day to be Mr. Steven Spielberg. Thank you for helping with the segue there, because I did not know how to segue from Good Night and Good Luck to Munich, even though I think it has a similar idea of taking current events and trying to show a lot of the ins and outs of it. But yeah, Steven Spielberg, my man. Let's talk about Mr. Munich. Mr. Munich. I was going to say Mr. Chad. Tell us about Munich. I put the Mr. too late in my thinking. Chad, it's late. It's actually not late, but I had to.
Munich.
I had Munich. Go ahead. Sorry.
Munich directed. Sorry.
You're both like,
Munich,
shut up, Dylan.
directed by Steven Spielberg, written by Eric Roth and Tony Kushner, cinematography by Janis Kaminski, music by John Williams, starring Eric Bana, Daniel Craig, Kieran Hines, Matthew Kasovitz, Hannah Ziegler, Ayelet Zurer, Jeffrey Rush, Mehdi Nabu, Gila Almagor, Michael Lonsdale, and Matthew Almeric. Synopsis: Mossad, the intelligence agency of Israel, directs agents to assassinate those potentially involved in the massacre at the 1972 Summer Olympic Games at Munich, based on the novel Vengeance by George Jonas, one of the Lost Jonas brothers. I made that up.
Yeah, you always got to throw a joke in there. I love it because this movie's heavy, so I appreciate the
Yeah.
laughter as we start it. But yeah, I'm a fan of the Berg. We all know it. I love him. He's my boy. But I'm interested to hear from you two because I think this was the one that I had seen that you two hadn't. Correct?
No, I've seen it.
I
yeah.
hadn't
Okay,
seen it
so we're gonna go with
before.
Stacy first then, as the first timer here. Stacy, what do you think of Munich?
I think I'm gonna have a drink to talk about it.
Uh-oh. Oh no.
So this movie, I actually had to watch about 2.5 times because I realized I started it, restarted it, started it again, let it run about halfway. I was like, I'm not getting enough. And then watched it all the way through and realized I hadn't been paying attention. And then watched it all the way through again. So I had a rough time with this movie.
Okay.
I, first of all, thought it was about the kidnapping, not this dude who's an assassin after the kidnapping. So that was, a little bit jarring to me to begin with, because I thought a movie about the kidnapping would be pretty interesting. I don't even know how I'd categorize it, because like they're out for revenge and they kind of interact like they're spies, but they're not really spies, and it's not really a revenge movie. It's this group of people that were put together to take out the people responsible for the kidnapping, right? I like the characters. I like Eric Bana. I think he's good. I think he was a strange. Isn't he like Australian to New Zealand or something? Like I thought it was
He's
kind
Australian,
of
I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was a strange
Yeah, he is.
choice for this character, but he did a fine job.
Actually, they're all kind of not. I mean, Eric
they're
Bana is
supposed to be.
Australian, Daniel Craig is English, Kieran Hines is Irish, Matthew Kasovitz
Yeah.
is French, Hans Ziegler is German. So they're all from all over the place.
I didn't care most of the time. Was the problem with this movie? I mean, I didn't really care. I would have cared if Eric Bana died, I guess, or if well, I think he did eventually die, but because I recognized him, Daniel Craig, but really just because I recognized him, not because his character
You care
did
more for the
anything
actor.
to draw
It's
me
almost
in.
like you care about the character because you care about the actor.
Right.
You at least know a face. Yeah.
Yeah, I was somewhat invested in whether or not they got this guy. The time the movie grabbed me the most when he was visiting the father of his source. That was the time I thought the movie was most compelling.
Mhm.
And it was really could have been cut out. Like a
Right.
3.5-hour movie that really was not needed. I did like how it showed us how this whole thing. I mean, this guy was not an assassin. I don't know what his job specifically was. I don't remember. Maybe I didn't pay enough attention. But he was not somebody who was used to killing people when he got brought into this. And I did like how it showed how much it impacted his life going forward after the fact. I really did like that. And I thought that was very well portrayed. And I thought there was a lot of really good performances and good scenes. I liked the stuff when they were in the safe house with the other guys that also were told they were getting given their own safe house. And then that went very badly, and I kind of felt bad about that. But for the most part, it didn't. For the most part, I wasn't like, oh my God, what's going to happen? I wasn't like feeling a lot for any of the characters. It just wasn't grabbing me with anything specifically most of the time.
All right.
So I didn't love it.
No, it's fair.
Um,
Listen, with 5 films, it's very rare that everyone on the panel, especially with 3 panelists, will like every single film or dislike every single
Yeah.
film. So it honestly makes for better discussion, I think, because then it can at least, and,
I
there's no wrong. You're not wrong, even though you are. You're not wrong. I'm kidding.
I honestly think it was nominated because of Spielberg. I don't think it was a Best Picture
Yeah, well,
nominee.
I mean,
Like,
we look at it too. It wasn't nominated anywhere else. I mean,
yeah, I
Critics'
think
Choice was really its big helping there. But yeah, it was a very surprising nominee on the day.
and I think it was because of Spielberg. I think that's why it got nominated,
Hmm.
pretty much.
Fair.
Yeah, which is interesting too, because like he was not getting nominated for everything at that time. Like Catch Me If You Can wasn't nominated.
Mhm.
Neither was War of the Worlds. Neither was
Well, War of the Worlds. I mean, come on.
I know, but like Minority Report. But like again, like it's not
Yeah.
just like, oh, he made
Minority
something,
Report,
let's nominate him.
sci-fi,
Yeah, I think
genre.
now he's in the era where, and I still think all his movies of this era are great. But like he's of the era now where if he makes something and it's not bad, he's getting in. Like The Post
Right.
and Bridge of
I
Spies and West Side Story and War Horse. But
do
I think
think,
this was the weird middle ground where he had past his prime, but he wasn't in his new era yet.
but I do think out of the movies you just listed, the only one that would have been Oscar Beatty-ish or worthy-ish would be Catch Me If You Can. And the other ones are genre. I mean, War of the Worlds wasn't
Right.
even a great sci-fi. Minority Report was a very genre-specific movie, which
Yeah, that's
I
fair.
very much like, but it didn't scream Oscar Best Picture nominee by any means. So,
Yeah, I think after Saving Private Ryan, he had a little bit of a dry spell, but this was
mhm,
kind of his return back. And I think it's also worth noting, and again, like we come at it from very different angles because I absolutely love this movie. I think it's fantastic, and I think it's one of his most underappreciated works, probably because it is so different than a lot of his other films. But I think because it's different is why I'm so intrigued by it, because he is coming off of this stretch of doing really interesting sci-fi stuff. AI, Minority Report, War of the Worlds is the same year, but still very fantastical in a way. He just did some Jurassic Park movies. He produced some
mhm,
other ones. But he hasn't done anything that's like this really kind of colder drama since Schindler's List. And even then, Schindler's List still has you grabbing for the tissues. It's a
mhm.
tearjerker, and so is a lot of his other, like Saving Private Ryan, also a tearjerker in a lot of ways. But I think this is the first one where he's committed to telling something that is very morally conflicting. There are no good guys and bad guys. There's only one side and the other side, and it's more so just following something that is, in a way of good night and good luck, something that's just kind of the facts rather than trying to take a side, which I think nowadays, especially given how this conflict in the Middle East has risen, I feel like now you kind of have to at least approach it from a certain side in telling a story, because then you just seem negligent. But I think especially at the time, especially given his background as a Jewish man and this moral conflict inside his own self, I think that's definitely well portrayed in the movie. I think it's a very fascinating exercise for him to kind of stretch his bounds to show this other side to him, where he's making a movie that's a lot colder. There's not that big happy ending that you get with a lot of Spielberg movies, even the scariest, saddest ones like Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan. You're not having that big moment at the end. It's very melancholic in the end, and I think that's what
what I
makes.
liked.
I mean, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you appreciate that. Yeah, but I think that's consistent for me. I'm like just very, very drawn into it because it's so different. And now I think he's made other movies that are a little similar now. But I think at the time, this was just such a. And I wasn't around at the time, but I wasn't watching Spielberg's movies at the time. But this was like very much, I could tell at a time, a very different type of movie for him. And I think that's really cool. It shows that he has versatility. And he's already shown that, but I think it shows even more of versatility while still bringing his voice that we know and his stylistic stuff that we know to the forefront. I think the biggest snub of the year is not Brokeback, it's not Heath Ledger, it's Janusz Kaminski not even getting nominated for cinematography, because I think for that it's mind-blowing in and of itself.
I do want to say a couple of positives because I feel like I just kind of just focused on the negative. I really liked how they incorporated the realistic news footage in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I was initially grabbed a lot with the kidnapping in the beginning. And I very much respected the movie in terms of all the technical stuff. It just could never really get a good hold on me.
Yeah, that's fair.
But I did want to just throw in that
Yeah.
there was stuff I liked. It's
Yeah.
not like I think it was horrible.
No, I know.
But
And again, I'm coming at it from a totally different lens, but I
right.
think that makes for an interesting conversation. But I'm interested, Chad, you're in the middle of us visually, you're between us, but where do you fall in terms of this movie? Are you in the middle? Are you more on my side? Are you more on Stacy's? And remember, which side you pick, it reflects your friendship. I'm kidding.
No, it
Imagine.
doesn't.
He's like, I'm more with
Imagine.
Stacy on this one. All right, friendship over.
Well,
I'm kidding.
if Dylan and I disagreeing on movies meant our friendship would have been over a long time ago.
It would have been
I'll
open.
say
It
that.
would have been over on our second episode when I put "Promising Young Woman" at the very bottom and you put it at the very top. So,
Yeah.
Did not.
I
haven't
did.
seen
In
that one,
retrospect,
apparently.
I even said after I edited the episode, in retrospect, I'll put it at 7, not 8. But again, I'm not a big Trial of Chicago 7 fan anymore. But
I love Promising Young
So-
Woman, but that's not the point.
I would love Stacy to sit here and gush about Promising Young Woman, but if you don't mind, let me get into Munich for a second. I'm more in the middle.
Okay.
I don't know. It's hard because it's not like Stacy was hating on the movie. I didn't think you were even hating on the movie at all. You just said it wasn't one of your favorites, and then you highlighted some really good parts about Munich. Like, it's definitely not a bad movie. I wouldn't describe it as fantastic, but I also thought that Dylan would probably really like this one because love Spielberg and stuff, and these are the kinds of movies I think you gravitate towards a lot of the times. Myself as well sometimes, but I think Stacy, for my criticisms of it, I think Stacy hit on it. I just think it's way too long. I think they fill it decently well, the length of it, and I think that the length of it is kind of commentary where it does feel like it takes this guy's Eric Bana's character, it takes up so much of his life and time doing not something that he even wants to do, but doing something that he's just being contracted out to do by the government, Israeli government. And yeah, I think because of that, it does the commentary and the length of it does kind of feel it's saying this thing is never ending. Even when they got most of the people that they were supposed to kill, is it over? He's obsessing about it. It's
Right,
the Conversation movie that we watched. That's you just always super anxiety about, is that car looking at me? Are they going to come at me and my family now and stuff, tying up loose ends or whatever kind of a deal. So I do think it's, maybe there's a reason that Spielberg made it so long, but I also I don't find the movie boring, but I just find it after 2 hours, I'm like, all right, I get it. Let's wrap it up now. And there's another 40 minutes and stuff.
Mhm.
And so for me, I'm like, I understand because there were specific amount of people that they had to show that they killed to make it, I guess, accurate. But it's after the second or third person that they're going to kill, I'm like, do we need to see the rest? Maybe do a montage or something or whatever of killing or something like that. I don't know, but I just did find it a little long. That being said, yeah, the moral complications of it I found fascinating. There is a lot of fascinating stuff of it. It is very relevant to today between the Palestine versus Israel, and we're dealing with that so much. We've been dealing that for a very long time, and this shows just a complicated history of a government feeling that a terrorism happened to them, and then they need to seek out retribution. And it's cold because they're not even doing it. They're contracting these people who aren't really that connected to it to do it. And then it's I don't know. And then I think you really feel for Eric Bana's character because, he is so conflicted a lot of the times, but you are seeing him do terrible things, and then terrible things are happening to him and you feel bad for him and stuff. So yeah, it's a very complicated situation. It's a very complicated movie. I think the movie captures that very well. Because you want to be on Eric Bana's side. I think I am for a lot of it. But then I'm also seeing them do terrible things, and then I'm just kind of hating, the government that's responsible for it, and just but then also terrorism's bad, but then also you shouldn't go around sending people to assassinate people. And then I think they do kind of hit on that where they have the one moment that they almost kill that little girl at the
Oh
piano.
my gosh, that scene is the most heart-wrenching in the whole movie.
And then when she escapes and you're like, phew, and then they kill him anyways. And you didn't want to kill the little girl, but you kill her dad, changing her life forever anyways.
Right.
What
It's
is
you're
going
not
on?
killing her, but you're essentially making her life much worse.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously killing would have been a lot worse, but you know what I mean. It's the whole idea of there's no win. There's no win.
Yeah.
And I love how you said that like the length could be because it's showing that this is a lengthy thing. This is a lengthy conflict. The movie's not 3
Yeah.
hours long. It's 52 years long. This happened in the
Right.
70s. This is a still happening. And I think that's what's so interesting is like, yes, I think a movie nowadays, now that the heightened tensions have gotten so high, you know, yes, it would be irresponsible not to take a side. But I also think for this film, the whole thing is that it's the perplexion of the fact that it's still an ongoing conflict and that both sides are in the wrong in their own ways. And I think that's what's so fascinating, but also so irritable and so frustrating of watching this movie too, is seeing exactly what you said, Chad, of like, you know, yes, they should be, they're awful people for what they did, but like, how you go about getting retribution. I mean, it's based on a book called Vengeance, and I think that's something Spielberg really wanted to
Yeah.
explore is this idea of vengeance. When do you then become the worst person? When do
Mhm.
you surpass that? When do you? And it's the same thing with the Capote conversation of like, yes, this is a criminal you're talking to. You're wanting to get the story, but at what point do you become just as culpable, just as awful in what you're doing in telling that story? And I think even Spielberg is reckoning with his own telling as a Jewish man. How should I feel as someone who is in the middle of both of this? You know, as a filmmaker, do I want to tell the truth? Do I want to take a side? Do I want to try to make this the hero? Do I want to make them the villains? And it's yes to all of that, and it's a no to
Yeah.
all of that. And I find that so
Hmm.
fascinating, the fact that he's using this as an exercise to not say who is right, who is wrong, but just understand why they do what they do and why, you know, kind of just come up with some sort of empathy as to what these people are thinking. And I think the best scene is the one where they are kind of stationed with that other group, and the two guys are just talking, and one's the
Yeah.
Palestine guy and one's the Jewish guy. Because I think that is the crux of what this movie's trying to say. And then immediately after that, as I think Stacy said, they just start shooting each other in the very
Mhm.
next scene, and it's like, damn, like it's really tough. It's a tough watch, and I think the length doesn't help with the density of it, but I also think it at least I understand why it is the length it is, even though I agree, I think it's a little too long. I do. I think that's the one detriment I will have for it is where Brokeback Mountain's almost close in length, but it for some reason, I think because of
Doesn't
the
feel it.
pacing, again, it doesn't feel it quite like this. I think by the end of this, you feel the length, but I think it is purposeful. Like he wants you to feel the length. He wants you to be tired of this conflict to then go home and research and realize people have been tired of this conflict for a long fucking time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And now 20 years later, it's still a conflict, and it's crazy. It's just crazy to put it in that perspective. So yeah, I agree with both what you both said, because I do think there's validity to that 100%, but I love it, you know. Chad?
Yeah, I wanted to because I was about to bring up the Spielberg being Jewish thing and how that relates, but then you mentioned it, and I was like, there you go. He said I was going to say, but yeah, I love how he basically gives us like an unflinching look at it, and it's like, here's what this is. How do you think about it and stuff like that. So I think that's very perfect, and I do think that he captures all of like Eric Bana's like confliction where he takes the job and then like throughout, even like his first kill with the guy with the groceries or whatever,
Oh God.
he's so conflicted about, and
Mhm.
they're like, what do we do it now? What do we do?
Right.
Kind of a deal, like fumbling it a little bit, and then they just end up doing it, and then from there it's kind of like straight shooting, but
Or
then
bombing.
or bombing. Yeah, some of those bombs are like the sequences are like terrifying. But like also going to the aftermath, like towards the end when he's just so afraid, and you at one point it's like people getting killed, and then cut from that to him having sex, and he's like
Yeah.
terrified.
A lot of people hate that scene.
Still,
They're like, that's what ruins the movie. And I'm like, but that's the crux of the movie. He's literally so in love with his wife and so into her that he's fucking her when she's 9 months pregnant at the beginning of the movie. And then
Mhm.
at the end, he's so terrified he can't even get it up. And I think that's just something to
Yeah.
say. It's like very fascinating how this character that we saw at the beginning in a totally different light is so different at the end. I think
Mhm.
that's, yeah. I think the
and
end sex scene is very important. Yeah.
seeing him the Eric Bana has a great performance in this, because it's like seeing him have that call with his wife, and he's not there with his daughter, and just hearing his voice, he just starts crying, and it's just like I feel that so much, because there's so many times that I have other obligations or I want to do something else, but then I'm like, well, I got to hang out with my son because I don't want to be anywhere else,
Mhm.
kind of a
Mm.
thing. So it's a whole conflict. So I totally feel for his character a lot of the times too.
Yeah. I think when you were talking about the whole like, and it's not even them who are fighting it, they're sending people off to do their like the government's sending the people off.
Yeah.
I thought about one of my favorite shots, and this is why I'm just raving so much about the style of the film too, and why Janusz Kaminski's snub here, not even getting nominated for cinematography, is still like beyond me, because that shot when Jeffrey Rush is basically giving him the lowdown, giving him the like, they're strolling along that like beautiful like shore side, and you got the water and the air and the community, and everyone's out and about and everyone's dressed really nice, and he's talking about this like terrorism act, and like that he's gonna go and hit all these 11 people, and it's just like the dichotomy of that, of like them just strolling and having a beautiful day in the neighborhood. It's like, meanwhile, you're going to send this man off into absolute hell. And I think that's something we're also experiencing. The people who are at home tweeting all these things about like, what side they're on, and I'm for this side, I'm for that side. But meanwhile, they're sitting at home comfortable, not having to actually deal with those atrocities firsthand. And I think it's a very similar idea of like, this guy's just having a stroll, beautiful day outside. It's sunny. Everyone's out and about. Everyone's having a great day. And he's giving him instructions to go fucking murder people. It's crazy.
Right.
And I just love the way it pans through that. I think all the shots of every single hit, like every moment, it's not meant to excite us, because it's not an exciting movie in that way. We shouldn't feel excited by this, but there's an engagement because of the way it's shot, the way it's edited. I mean, just that one sequence Chad was talking about with the little girl running in, the way that scene is edited is so good. And like, honestly, I would have given this editing and cinematography. Cinematography would have been tough, especially with Brokeback in the mix, but like just the way that scene is conveyed is so powerful. So I love it. I love it so much. Stacy, what else do you have to add to Munich?
I did really like the fact that we found out that the bomb maker was never a bomb maker. He was a bomb disassembler and a toy. I mean, we found he was a toy maker right when he got hired. They talked about him being a toy maker. But then, to find out that he disassembled bombs, he's never actually built one. I don't know why that stuck with me, but I really loved that detail for some reason. And there was a lot I liked about the movie. I don't think it will be my number 5. But
I was wrong. Yeah. I made a bet with Chad earlier. I was like, I bet that's her number 5.
I mean, it's close. It will be a toss up right at the end, probably.
All right, we'll find out.
But,
finding out very soon.
But yeah, there was and I really, really did like the aftermath. I really liked that part. I thought was very well done and effective, is showing impact all of it had on his life, which I already said, so now I'm repeating myself. I guess I'm done.
No, we will not make the conversation go as long as the movie is, but any other thoughts from you, Chad, on this? All right. Well, Munich, surprise nominee on the day, but it did get nominated for 5 nominations. Pretty big categories too. It doesn't win any, but it got nominated for picture, director for Steven Spielberg, adapted screenplay, original score, and best film editing. So there we go. Those are the 5 movies. Now we have the very difficult, or maybe easy task. It was easy for me, but maybe it's difficult for y'all, of ranking these 5 movies from worst to best, from 5 to 1. And as always, we do start with our guests. So Stacey, you're going to have to make a decision now. What is going to be your number 5 film of this slate?
After discussing them, I think my number 5 is going to be Good Night and Good Luck.
All right. So Chad, what is your number 5?
Oh, I have to talk about it. Okay.
You can talk after about your ranking once.
It's fine. I don't really need to.
Okay, Chad.
Well, I'm going to touch on it real quick, that this was kind of straightforward for me, except for I did have it one way and then I swapped 2. This one was always my number 5. It's Crash.
Okay. And my number 5 is also Crash. So
Stacey, I forgot about Crash. I was like trying to think of the movies, and I'm like, I'm missing one. Which one am I missing?
Okay.
It was Crash. That was the one I couldn't think of.
It's okay. Stacey, what is going to be your number 4?
Crash. It should have been number 5. I just forgot.
You can put it at number 5 if you want.
Yeah, I want to switch them.
Okay. Honestly, you talked most positively between the 3 of us of it, so I would not begrudge you if you put it at 4. But it looks like Crash is our common.
It shouldn't have won Best Picture. It should not be nominated for a Best Picture. There's just so much against it. At least the other ones I respect.
Okay.
I can't award it for the emotions it gave me 20 years ago.
No problem. That's why it's always fun to do these in retrospect. All right. So your number 4 then is Good Night and Good Luck. Chad, what is your number 4?
I had another movie here at this spot before, but then I changed it to Good Night and Good Luck.
Guys, we might have the same exact ranking, because my number 4 is also Good Night and Good Luck. So Chad, it might switch now. Stacey, what is your number 3?
Munich.
Chad, what's your number 3?
I think Stacy and I are gonna have the exact same ranking. It's Munich. It's number
All
3.
right, and my number 3 is Capote. So that's where we differ. That's where we differ.
Yeah.
But I'll just say, I think I know where this is going, and my number 2 is Munich. So, Stacy, what is your number 2?
Capote.
All right, and Chad, your number 2?
Capote.
All right, which means our number 1. We
Unanimous.
almost had identical rankings except for the number 2 and 3 spot. I switched, so I'm the reason we are not having identical. We've never had identical rankings with 3 people. We've had it between me and Chad like twice, but everyone on 3. Even though it never works on StreamYard, but we're gonna try it anyway. On 3, we're gonna say that the winner of Best Picture. 1, 2, 3. Brokeback Mountain. Okay, we kind of got there. That is going to be our Best Picture. Yeah, we kind of all knew coming in. I mean, this is like a film I've always put as like one of my favorite films of all time. So like, I kind of expected it to be all of our number ones because I know what Chad and Stacey think about it, but I never knew. Sometimes a film will come out and surprise us, but that is going to be our number 1. Any thoughts? Just any recap on your ranking, Chad, that you want to mention?
Well, I just wanted to say I can't quit you, Dylan, and I can't quit you, Stacy.
Okay.
Thank you. No, I think there's a reason why our rankings are very similar. It's just Dylan liked Munich slightly more than we did and didn't have much attachment to Capote.
And I'd like to believe that I swayed you a little bit, Chad, on putting Munich a little higher. So I'll take pride in that.
Well, I put Munich higher after I watched it, but
okay.
you made me more sure that it was definitely a number 3. Yeah.
Stacey, any just recap of your ranking? Anything you want to note?
No, I mean, I think I really said everything when we discussed the movies. It was, close between Munich and Good Night and Good Luck. And I think that our conversation helped me make that decision. I didn't have it made coming in.
Okay.
Just so you know, it was not set in stone coming into it. So the conversation really kind of helped me with that. But
yeah. And from what I gathered, you're kind of, you feel neutral about both, but it's more so one is shorter, so it's an easier watch, but one has more interesting individual moments at times. Yes. Is kind of what I gauge. So I think that's kind of true with me too. I do think, honestly, if the Best Picture of it all didn't exist, I probably would have put Crash above Good Night and Good Luck just because I don't see myself thinking about Good Night and Good Luck much, but I do think Crash is not a better movie. I think Good Night and Good Luck is a better movie. It's just Crash is more memorable and maybe more entertaining, but maybe for the wrong reasons. Maybe Matt and I will cover it someday on Framework. We'll see. But
yes, please.
Let's get that'll be a first Best Picture winner on both. We've never done that before. All right, Stacey, you decided to go first for Best Actor, and let's surprise no one when you tell us what your choice is going to be for Best Actor. And if it's anyone but the person I already wrote down, I'm going to be gobsmacked.
It's not.
So I shouldn't say a joke answer first.
I mean,
Matt Dillon. No, I'm just kidding.
Matt Dillon.
So it is Heath Ledger, and yes, here's the thing: if you really know me, I am extra hard on things I'm biased for, because I'm trying to overcompensate for my bias, if that makes sense. Like, it's the more I like you, the harder I'm going to be on you. And I was afraid that after watching all the movies that maybe the Academy got it right. I think a lot of people think the Academy got it right. Here's why I don't. And I don't know if I'm supposed to go into this. Am I just supposed to say my
this is a good time to bring it up if you're going to talk about the acting. Yeah.
So here's my thoughts on the acting. The pros for Heath Ledger is how much he conveys in his silences, how much of that masculinity he brings, even though he's broken and torn up inside. And just, I've heard him be like, I've heard people say like, because he shows up and mumbles. Like, just so much more than that. Like, everything. He's part of the reason it's so easy to rewatch the movie, because his character he just makes so captivating. And his anger at times, just, he's so stoic and quiet and held in, and just, you feel him repressing himself all the time, which is all just in his physicality in the acting. And then when he has these violent outbursts, it's like almost cathartic for the audience for him, because he's always holding so much in. And that was a character that he made. I mean, yes, there was a short story it was based on. I did read it. I don't remember it. So I don't remember how much of that was on the page. I think Philip Seymour Hoffman did a fantastic job of becoming Capote, who already existed and who he could see and copy, per lack of a better word. I don't think he did a copy or a character. I think he brought a lot of talent to it. Like I said, he wasn't undeserving. I just think he had a lot more to base that character on, and to base those mannerisms, and to base that voice. And it was a showier character. It was more of a look at me character. I think he had a lot more to work with in that way than Heath Ledger did with what he brought to his character. And that's why I remain in the Heath Ledger should have won camp.
That's a very valid point, and honestly, that's usually what the debate always is like a biopic versus an original, or not original, but like something that's never been seen. It's like, you're going from scratch versus going from someone that you're just merely imitating. But it's also like it takes a lot to be able to get a perfect imitation too. So I get
absolutely.
it. Yeah, no, it's great. So I'm up next for actor, and I'm actually I was very excited because I knew I wasn't going to get Heath. If for some reason you picked someone else, maybe, or if you went like actress first, then I would have snagged Heath. He was my number one, undoubtedly. But my number two, I'm actually very happy I get to rep him because he was someone who was not nominated. And I really love this performance so much, and it was the one that surprised me the most because this actor, I've not seen a lot of his work before, and that is Clifton Collins Jr. for Capote.
Yes.
I loved his performance so much, and obviously, again, not taking away from the centerpiece of that movie being so phenomenal, but it's also like that was a performance that surprised me because I knew one of the best actors who ever lived is going to be able to nail Truman Capote. What I didn't know was this guy who I've never seen in anything before. I think I saw he was in a movie called Jockey a few years ago, which I never got to see. But he's always a supporting player. But he was like, he had me scared because there were times where I was wondering, did he do it? Did he not? But even then I was like, I think he did it. But also I'm like really frightened by it. Like I'm on the edge of my seat. There was like a coldness where I'm like, okay, I feel the bond. I feel the warmth. I feel the human behind this guy, but I also feel like he could kill in any minute. And I think that's what's so interesting about that character. Every single scene, the best scenes in that movie for me are the scenes with him and Philip Seymour Hoffman, because I think of his just engagement with the conversations. Like there are great scenes. Philip Seymour Hoffman is so fantastic in that movie, but I think when they're together, it's even better because Clifton Collins Jr. is also giving him so much. And I think even if they were two original characters, I still think it would have been invigorating cinema. But I think the fact that they are also playing these real figures heightens it for me. I know there's the downside of biopics, but it's also the plus side is that you're literally tapping into someone that you can research, that you can kind of bring to your own body of work and craft and mold. And I think that's very fascinating. So I'm very happy to rep him. If I couldn't get my number one, he was my number two, and then my number three maybe Chad will pick. So we'll talk about it in a sec. I think I put Chad in a difficult spot because there's so many actor performances to choose from, and two big ones still left on the board. But this was my number two. Like I wasn't picking this just to be unique and different. Like I sincerely believe that this was the best supporting performance of these five movies.
I do too.
And Heath Ledger's the best leading performance. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go.
100% agree.
Wow, yay, Chad. Sorry to put you in this spot. I know you're getting a little frustrated when I was talking, but I want to know what you're
doing. Not frustrated at you, just frustrated at the decision that I know. I'm stuck with right now.
I know.
No, it's not you at all. It's just Stacy made a great decision, and I don't have the attachment to Heath Ledger that she does, but every time I watch that movie, I just I can't with his character and his performance, just because it's so freaking good. That just he gets, like you said, the mumbling part is like one of my favorite parts because he talks like someone who chews tobacco and talks like someone who comes from that like Midwest style like cowboy drawl and stuff. He fully encapsulates that with the toxicity that's embedded and all that. We could go on talking about that performance. I really would have loved to pick that, but I'm so glad Stacy got to, because she always reps Heath Ledger. And I love, Dylan having kind of like a little bit of a nuanced pick. But now I have to pick between Philip Seymour Hoffman and Jake Gyllenhaal. I'm like with Stacy and Heath Ledger, I love Jake Gyllenhaal. He's just one of my favorite actors. I want to see him on the board. But then Philip Seymour Hoffman, I'm not debating here about between those two. I think those two performances are so good, so next level, Heath Ledger and Philip Seymour Hoffman, that I feel like both need to be on there. But I really also want to give it to Jake Gyllenhaal. But I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna give it to Philip Seymour Hoffman because I feel like I feel like the Academy both got it wrong and right because those two performances are just so next level. I feel like, the argument that one created a character and then one encapsulated like a real person. I feel like those are two separate skills that are both very valid and
Mhm.
very awesome. And I feel like Philip Seymour Hoffman did it perfectly
He did.
to not just mimic the voice, but just become that character. And I love that so much that you know, uh I feel like I can't because I think Jake Gyllenhaal crushed it too. He looks so good in that role. Um, but I feel like, Philip Seymour Hoffman is more next level. So yeah, it just
If it's any
because
consolation, he was my number 3. So
yeah,
yeah, Philip Seymour Hoffman,
because
I think it is the right
Yeah.
choice.
Like, yeah, he's so like he's the manipulation, the of people, but then also getting very emotional towards the end where he doesn't even know how to feel. He's like he doesn't even want to be there at the execution, but the guy's like, I'd like someone to be there, and then he's just like breaking down. I don't know.
Mhm.
It's just such a great performance. Anyways, we can move on.
Yeah. Well, you get to lead us off with the next thing, Chad. So you get to tell us who your best actress of this 5 movie slate is.
And I'm gonna go right back to Brokeback Mountain and pick Michelle Williams.
Of course.
Because yeah, I mean, there's a lot more in the slate, I think, male performances that like are just really, really stacked. And there are some great lady performances as well. But none really spoke out to me except for her. Really, because she is that one that's like very conflicted, and I keep forgetting she's not in as much of the movie as I thought she was. She's only in like a small part of it. But I think her screen time is very well used. Like her like finding out, like seeing them kiss, and then struggling for like years to figure out how she feels about this. Like he's cheating, but it's also this like unspoken like taboo thing that her husband is doing that probably everyone around her is saying is wrong
Mhm.
and sin and stuff like that. And so she's so conflicted in many different ways. There's so much layers to how she feels about this, and she feels betrayed in so many different ways, and she just wants to have kind of like a normal family, and it's not his fault that he wanted to also have a normal family, but he doesn't even know what normal is, and there is no normal actually. But in their world, there's a normalcy to what you're supposed to do, and he got caught up in that. She got caught up in that, and no one wins in this situation because no one can be who they want to be. And I just that's more about the movie, but her performance I think says all of that. So
Yeah. Yeah, obviously. Yeah, it's tough because this slate, it's so male heavy. It is. And even the movies with women are men's stories that they are merely supporting. And I think the best movie that does show the female perspective of things is Brokeback Mountain. So despite her screen time, I'm going to give mine to Anne Hathaway because I think she is even smaller a presence than Michelle Williams, but
Mhm.
it's that phone call for me that really cements it because you can tell there's so much pain. And it's again the thing of like, did she know? Did she not? I think the parents make it clear that they knew.
Yeah.
I don't know if she knew. I think she might be so aloof to it. But either way, if you look at it as she's aloof to it or she knew about it, either way, it's still phenomenal conveying of emotions because she's either being like, fuck you, I wanted what you had because he never truly loved me, or it's like I'm grieving, how dare you just call me and ask what happened to him, like I'm obviously in a fragile place. And I think it could be a mix of both. I don't know, and I genuinely wanted to ask you guys earlier, but I was gonna save it for now because I figured you would take Michelle Williams. I figured I could get Anne Hathaway. She's also one of my favorite actresses, period, so I'm glad I get to
yeah.
rep her because I feel like she doesn't have many opportunities on Picture This to get mentioned, and the one she won the Oscar for we didn't choose for Les Mis. So I'm happy she's represented in the Picture This legacy, even though she's not quite a Hall of Famer
Yeah.
yet, but maybe someday. Do you think she
I, I
knows?
I
I
think she didn't know.
I think she was suspicious but not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Chad,
Yeah.
you're more in the
I can see
aloof
that.
camp. Stacey's more of the picking up maybe hints. I'm kind of more on the aloof thing. Like I don't think she knew. And I think she's genuinely grieving. But I also think that adds so much interesting stuff to her character
Yeah.
because when he does stand up for her, it's partially frustration at the masculinity thing of standing up to another
Yeah.
man to prove his masculinity, but for her, that's everything. She's showing that he loves her, and for her, that makes her warm inside. She gives that smirk at the dinner table, and I'm like, I love it. But yeah,
She's great.
A New Jersey local, Paper Mill Playhouse. There you go. Stacy, who you picking? I know we still left you with a couple options.
Yeah,
but,
I know. And honestly, there are no leading actresses in any of these movies. They're all supporting.
It's a bit barren.
It is really a rough actress slate. It was a very male dominated, which you guys said, but I've been wanting to say since I watched these movies, so I'm saying it again anyway. I'm gonna go with Catherine Keener in Capote.
Nice.
Do you
Yes.
think that her as Harper Lee really helped like him somewhat and see some of why he wasn't a completely horrible person? And, I think she brought, she was kind of like a bright light in that movie to me. And so, yeah, I'm going to go with her.
Yeah, she was great. Yeah.
Yeah. So there you have it. Let's recap real quick. The best actors we have. I have Clifton Collins Jr. for Capote. Chad has Philip Seymour Hoffman for Capote. Stacy has Heath Ledger for Brokeback Mountain. For Best Actress, I have Anne Hathaway for Brokeback Mountain. Chad has Michelle Williams for Brokeback Mountain, and Stacy has Catherine Keener for Capote. And our best picture amongst the three of us is Brokeback Mountain, which means that for the fourth time, I think, ever, I need to check my notes, a film has won 4 Picture This awards and ties the record now. It was previously held by Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Shakespeare in Love, The Godfather, and Goodfellas, I believe. Oh, and To Kill a Mockingbird. So this becomes the 6th film to win 4 Picture This awards. And had Jake Gyllenhaal gotten in, it would have broken the record. But I do love that Capote's represented with 3 awards, which is huge too. So very clear that those are the top 2 movies worth accolades. Even though I did put Munich above Capote on the ranking, that is kind of our consensus. Those are the 2 movies that deserve your attention the most, audience. So go check them out. They're great, even though we spoiled them all at large. But any thoughts on anything else, Chad, with this slate?
Since we said Brokeback Mountain should have won, Crash should not have won by our rankings, and that we said Brokeback Mountain is the best of this slate, I can say that the upset is justified.
Upset
People
justified.
are right to feel upset, and it was an upset in the vernacular of how you talk about award season. So every episode, maybe we'll declare if the upset was justified or not.
Yeah. So the being upset is justified. The actual upset was not justified because Crash was not a justified win. So that's the distinction. So the upset is being upset is justified. The actual upset should not be justified. It should have been the other way around.
Okay, right.
Yeah, no, I knew what you were trying to say. I just wanted to put in words that, because you're right. Being upset about it is definitely justified.
Categorizing it as an upset is justified.
Yes.
But they were not justified in doing the upset.
Yes. So upset, we go team Brokeback for this one. And we'll have to see next month what we do with what we're doing next time for the year of the upset, which is the year. This is actually more surprising based on the odds because this hadn't won any precursors either. And there were several other awards that other films that had won a bunch of precursors. We're looking at the year. We're actually in 2005 right now. We're going to go not 20 years back, but 30 years back to 1995 for the next episode. Chad and I are going to be joined by Matty Fresh Chapman, co-host of Frame Rec, to talk about those movies. And the big upset was not only Braveheart winning, but Braveheart beating 2 heavy hitters in Apollo 13 and Sense and Sensibility. So we're going to be talking about kind of a double upset in a way where it was not even the second most likely to win. Here, people thought if it wasn't Brokeback, it was Crash. Here, next year, that we're talking about, it wasn't even thought about that Braveheart could win. So we're going to be talking about those 5 movies. What the 5 movies are, though: Apollo 13, Babe, Braveheart, Il Postino, The Postman, and Sense and Sensibility, another Ang Lee picture. So doing a lot of double ups here, and that'll be with Matt. But Stacey, any last thoughts here as we wrap up this episode of Picture This? Great job for your first time. Congratulations. You're now no longer a Picture This virgin. You've lost your, you popped your Picture This cherry, if you will.
She's made her Picture This.
Turning in my V card.
There you go. Thank you so much. What are your thoughts? Just this whole experience. Any last departing thoughts for us?
This was a lot of fun. I will feel more comfortable next time.
You're a natural.
It won't be my first time, and I'm glad it made me watch these movies. even though I didn't love them all.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'd love to be on again when you're talking about movies I want to talk about, I guess.
Yeah. We may or may not have already locked her in for a spot in 2026 because we've been putting off a certain year that we promised her a long time ago. So we will see, Stacy.
Now when I've
we
seen
will-
all the movies already, I believe.
Yes, we will see. Like SEA, Stacy later. That's your hint. But thank you so much, Stacy. A great guest. You were worried you wouldn't have enough to talk about, but I thought you had plenty to talk about, and that's why we're here too, to help support. This time we had a leading lady front and center who stole everyone's hearts and stole all the amazing intellect. But these movies lacking on female characters, but here we had a great woman guesting with us, and we're very happy you came on, Stacy. So thank you. Chad, any last thoughts from you before we wrap it up?
Yeah, Stacy was a very great first-time guest. I love first-time guests because I'm always wondering how things are going to flow, and I think Stacy crushed it. Like brought up so many great thoughts about these movies, and just like I think it flowed so well. So thank you, Stacy, for coming on here because this was so fun. It helps that we're just all like really good friends and just in general having great conversations. And I can't wait to see her again at some point. Maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe
she'll definitely be hunting for another this episode.
And I'm very, very excited for 1995.
Yes,
Where no, I was 5.
Yes,
And
I can't
Dylan
wait to
was
hear you
not
talk
born
about
yet.
your
I was a junior in
experiences of
high school.
Ooh, I love that. Yeah, dating all our panelists here today. But no, that's a great point. Yeah, I wasn't alive yet, but Chad was. It's one of the rare years. There's only 7 years of Picture This where one of us was alive and the other wasn't, which is kind of cool. And we've covered.
started with one of them.
Yeah, we started with 194. I was gonna say we haven't done any of them, but we've done one of them. But thank you guys so much. Our socials are down there. Chad, you want to really quickly plug anything?
Yeah, just quickly, go over to what's down there, Cinema Chad. Check out all the rankings we do. Go to Welcome to Prime Time, which is a horror show I do with my wife and my buddy Hunter. We just talk all about horror. And then, no, I usually just plug this and watch this. Watch the rest of Dill's channel because there's a lot of great stuff on there.
Thank you. And you can find me at Dylan_Randazzo at not Twitter. I don't know. Maybe I'm there. I don't know. Maybe I'm on Blue Sky. I'm figuring that out. I usually do Twitter as like my lead up, but I changed the graphic to make it a little cleaner. So find me on Letterboxd. And also find me at the Dill Pickle Movie Network. If you're listening on podcast, go check us out on video. Stacey, anything to plug anywhere they can find you? I know you're not doing it anymore, but please plug the podcast because it's fantastic.
Oh, Between the Screens was a podcast I did for about almost a full year, and we had 30-something episodes, I think.
It's fantastic.
And it was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, my co-host could no longer do it, and that's why it ended, not for any other reason. So yeah, if you want to check that out, it's still out there wherever you listen to podcasts, and it's a lot of fun. You can find me at Stacy LM78 pretty much on most social medias. And I don't have anything to plug. I was in a couple of episodes of Frame Wreck not too long ago. If you haven't checked those out, you should. No immediate plans for my next appearance on here, on the network. But I'm sure I'll pop up again at some point in the nearish future. Absolutely. And I'm on over on Maddie Loves Movies channel a little bit too, if you want to watch some of that and catch me over there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Stacey. Thank you, Chad. And thank you all for watching. And stay tuned. We got a lot more interesting Oscar stuff and a lot of upsets coming up the wazoo. So stay tuned. And thanks for watching. Till next time, 1995. Here we go.